and a European Community Marie Curie Fellow in the 7th Framework Program, and a researcher at the University of Texas at Austin. She received her PhD and habilitation both in agricultural economics and policy from Humboldt University of Berlin, Germany. She published 3 books and author in excess of 40 peer-reviewed journal publications and book chapters. Jade specializes in policy evaluation and decision-making support in the field of natural resource, environment, bioenergy, agricultural economics, and sustainable resource management. Her current research focuses on optimizing water management systems, desalination, biofuels, and socioeconomic implications of drought. So she's going to give us a brief to get us started on the discussion on scarcity and abundance in our arid lands. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't know who is going to coordinate the slides. Okay.
Okay, ya está. Okay, ya está.
Do I need a mic at all? Everyone can hear me, right?
I don't know whether they are. Sí, es que está.
Oh, they are recording. Okay. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming to this session. It's a great pleasure to be here and have the chance to initiate the discussion. As Jordan asked, to come up with some questions, some openers. I don't have a standard presentation itself. I have several questions that I put together, or several issues that I thought might be kind of a food for thought for us to start putting our concepts together. But then I realized after the session in the morning, many of those aspects, or maybe all of those aspects, have already been addressed. So maybe kind of a refresher what we have been talking about in the morning, and to get us up to speed and wake us a little bit up, because lunch is probably kicking in and now we will get a little bit sleepy. So let us start thinking about the issues that we are facing on both sides of in the transboundary regions. I was looking for some literature, some consistency in literature, and I hope there would be more publications addressing those transboundary issues. And as you probably know better than myself, or those who have been working on those areas for many, many years, you are more aware that there is a lot of discussion, but there is really no coherent or cohesive or no uniform way of talking about this. And the literature that I found was not really like a mainstream, but it was kind of scattered and sometimes addressing specific regions or one specific river basin, but not the entirety of those transboundary issues. And we ask ourselves, is it good? Is it bad? Is it good to tackle those issues regionally? As we look at different states in the US, right? Is it important to look at each state and each part of the Mexican I don't know what kind of an equivalent state, also Mexican states here, right? Do we look at those issues at the regional scale, taking it one by one, or do we prefer having a more uniform framework, looking at all of those regions in a uniform way? And this is actually a question that we were trying to figure out on a project that is still ongoing, that I'm working on, and it refers to the Rio Grande specifically. So the project is about the Rio Grande basin, and we look at Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas, and different counties along the river within each of those states. And we asked ourselves, should we look at each state separately, or should we develop a framework for the entire Rio Grande? And as you can imagine, it was a difficult question to answer, and we have been tackling with it because it's almost impossible to come up with one framework addressing all those issues at once. And I think we had those questions also at the end of the morning session. What are the models? What are the approaches that we need to develop to be able to deal with those transboundary issues? It might be that we need different approaches in different regions along the border of the US and Mexico, because there are different environmental, economic, and social issues. And even if those issues are similar or the same, maybe they have a different importance in different regions, right? So we might be able to weigh them in a different way. Even if we have this uniform framework for the entire border area, we might have to weigh those issues with different weights, right? Depending on how relevant those issues are. And that's why it's important to have those interactive workshops, right? Because those are people from the region and those specific areas that are able to identify issues at hand and not just talk about the general problem that might be more applicable to some specific regions. So just to start with the major issues, transboundary issues that will refer to the entire area we are discussing here at this workshop, we could divide them probably and could split them into those 4 groups of common natural resource issues, shared natural resource issues, transboundary problems, and linked issues. So we talk about commons as common resources. Those are resources that are sometimes outside of the formal jurisdiction, but those resources are very valuable for regardless of where we live. And this refers to any part of problems like clean air, ozone. It doesn't matter where we live, right? Because it affects everyone. Common resources, and we'll get back to it later on when we talk about the tragedy of the commons and overuse of those resources that are shared. Is like a common pool resource that in many cases is overused. We have shared natural resources. Those are in many cases covered by different jurisdictions or different groups of the societies, like rivers, for example, that that are like split, might be governed by different regulations, right? Rio Grande, any kind of the river that is being shared between the US and Mexico. And we know about the regulations, right? That could talk a lot about the legal issues, and we know about the treaties between the US and Mexico, water quality that we are dealing with in the upper parts of the river, the water pollution that gets down when we look at Brownsville, for example, and the end of the Rio Grande. What's the water quality? How do we deal with this part of water management? So it's not only the water quantity issue, because this is also what we want to think about. We don't get enough water from upstream to reach the Gulf of Mexico, right? And think about the impacts on the regional communities. This is another issue of thinking about additional water resources and coming up with technologies that would allow for providing an additional water supply. And this is what Brownsville has been doing. They had an issue with water quality, and they were asking, should we open a new wastewater treatment plant to purify this water and provide it as an additional water resource to the society, or should we build a desalination plant? Should we think about prospective approaches that maybe bring us a little bit further than what they have been doing up until now? So, okay, so shared resources, transboundary externalities. Externalities in itself, a very important issue. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this concept. Positive and negative externalities is an environmental economics concept. The situation that we are facing or generating when we impact other people by our behavior, and they either experience harm because of our behavior and they're not compensated, or they have a benefit and they don't pay for it. Okay, so this is a traditional concept. In the context of our discussion, we have a negative externality with the rivers and watersheds, because people upstream might pollute water and generate a negative impact on this river and this water body. And the negative impact shows downstream when people are affected by the poor water quality, and no one is really compensating them for this damage, because they are also entitled, or they expect the same quality of water as people upstream, right? So there is no pricing mechanism for certain issues, and in such situations we talk about externalities. And those externalities normally surface questions regarding environmental issues, river pollution, and CO2 emissions. When you think about any greenhouse gas emission, those gases are traveling around the globe, right? So whatever we generate here, we pollute the air, the environment in one region. This air is circulating around the globe with the wind, right? And people in a different region are being negatively impacted through the rain that falls down on the soil and contaminates the soil. And no one really is responsible for this pollution, right? No one pays or no one is compensated. So this is another example of a negative externality. So this is what we are dealing with also when talking about those transboundary issues, right? Pollution or a negative impact on one side might have a negative influence on the other side of the transboundary region. And we have linked issues also that mean unintended consequences that relate to certain institutions or maybe some agreements, international trade. If there is international trade agreement in place that has some environmental impacts and no one really regulated it, we know there are many loopholes on this end or another end, right? There are issues like this that might be overlooked as well. So this is another point that might be worth of thinking of. Is there anything that impacts those transboundary collaborations or resource management that we are not thinking about because they're kind of hidden or not the first thing that pops up when we discuss those problems? Okay, where is this? Another question that I would like to bring up is on the economic side. And this was mentioned during the morning session, specifically about water resources. There is in the US at least, I'm not very much aware of the system and structure here in Mexico, but we don't really have a pricing system for water as a resource, okay? So there is no market for water, meaning water is a free resource. Like air, we breathe air, it's free, we don't pay for it. Water is free, and we pay our water bills, but this is not the price that we pay for water. The water bill shows the price that we pay for pumping water up, purifying the water, for the cost for administrative processing, and piping this water to the customers. the price of water is non-existent. Okay, so it's a free resource. It has been a free resource for forever. And when you hear about water wars happening in different countries, this is when water resources get privatized and people become unhappy because they had free water and now they have to pay a lot of money to private companies that took over, right? But for the most part, water is a free resource. And because of this, we got used to overusing this resource, using too much for agricultural purposes, or not having a proper equipment that would allow to be efficient with water applications. Another issue is the growing population that was also brought up in urban areas, right? Not necessarily rural or agricultural areas themselves, but the population is growing wherever you look. And this means there is a growing demand for many natural resources, and water being one of them. And water used not only for drinking purposes, but also for industrial processing and municipal, industrial, and agricultural, right? So growing population, growing water demand in all those areas. How do we cope with it? Especially when we add the problem of droughts that are hitting us more and more frequently. New technological developments is one solution to those problems, but this is not going to solve the problem completely. We need to think about efficiency, and we need to talk about collaborative ways of establishing measures that would allow maybe for establishing some process of pricing water. And I said at the beginning, there are no markets for water. There is a concept of water banks, banking water. This has been implemented in several states in the US, Arizona and Colorado, in California, those more environmental states. But this is still a mechanism of storing water for a later use, but it's not a water market. We know markets operate based on the principle, as you can see here, demand and supply, right? And depending on how much we demand, as much is produced in the free market economy, this determines the price, this equilibrium price that you can see there. Because there is no market for water, there is no price for water. So maybe there is, there definitely is this chance or an opportunity or a long-term consideration for establishing a water market in the future, or a more cohesive water market framework in the future. But it's been very challenging because of the issues that I mentioned at the beginning. We have always looked at water, and we have always used water as a free resource, right? We are not happy with paying for water or having a price that would bump up our bills. Okay, when thinking about this question and this debate or this session here, I was thinking about the resource management on the one hand, and then collaboration efforts on the other hand. So in terms of the resource management, I think we could ask ourselves the question, if those resources are managed in the same way on both sides, or would it be easier to manage them in a collaborative way? Okay. What would be an impediment, or what would be the advantage of doing it collaboratively or doing it one by one, comparing notes and learning from each other? So a perspective of how to approach the question of resource management. And in this context, are we dealing with those resource management issues in the same way on both sides? Or do we have different measures, different programs? And we certainly have different programs, right? When certain programs work well, maybe we should think about transferring them, learning and applying them in a modified way, right? We know we can never transport a specific program or a specific measure 100% in an equivalent way to a different region for known purposes. But I believe learning from each other is an important aspect. The question of sustainability that we are talking about, how is sustainability discussed and approached on both sides? We might have different definitions of sustainability depending on the region, right? Again, we talked about the weighing the importance of different resources in different regions. The same with sustainability. How do we define this concept? We know sustainability has three pillars, right? Economic, environmental, and social. And again, those pillars might be more or less important in different regions. How do we define sustainability in the short and long term? And then the second question, the collaboration issues. So the resource management issues on the one hand, and the collaboration issues regarding sustainability on the other hand. Are our efforts similar when we look at each of our nations separately, or would it be better to look at them from the international perspective? What are the barriers to do it in international framework, right? And this is what we started to talk about. Once we figure out the barriers, we might think about processes mitigating those barriers, right? How do we make this process more efficient? What would facilitate our international collaboration and cooperation? What have we done in the past? What are we doing in the present to make our future better, right? This is all within this sustainability framework. Have we done something in the past that we discontinued? Maybe it was a good approach, but discontinued because of some regulations, right? But it worked well. Maybe we should reinstate it. Or maybe we can learn from bad experiences as well, not to repeat errors that we did in the past. And then the next question, what could be an effective structure to facilitate this cooperation? It's not only about having ideas. We need some kind of a structured framework. What framework would work well? Right? Because there are many ways of doing different things, many ways of collaborating, many different measures that can be put in place or expanded, right? Having the measures that we have in place, we want to expand. And the last question about institutions. Are treaties helpful? Those are things that I mentioned at the beginning, within the jurisdictions that we might not be able to impact directly. But in some cases, those treaties and agreements might be helpful. In some cases, they might not. Maybe we need some additional agreements. And sometimes it's just this grassroots movement that starts new ways, new approaches, and new legislations. So another point that might be considered in the scope of this discussion. And going back to sustainability, what I mentioned at the beginning in regard to common resources and the tragedy of the commons, and why is it important to include regional stakeholders who have knowledge about issues at hand? Because we tend to overuse our common resources. We have a resource, we have a water resource, a common pool resource, and we think, well, we need this resource. We want to use as much of it as possible to satisfy our needs. We can take agriculture as an example. Each farmer wants to get enough water to grow their crops. And if everyone knows they're sitting on an aquifer that is limited, and everyone is pumping water, even if you have an incentive or kind of a prompt to not overuse resources, farmers will say, well, if I don't pump this water, then my neighbor is going to pump this water, right? So the question of using this common resource in a sustainable way, in a considerable way that will be regarding the use of water resource also by other people, not just by one single person, one single household. So this concept refers to the situation when we as individuals utilize resources based on our personal perceptions rather than caring for the community as the large. And caring for the community is what we should do when we talk about sustainability in the short and long term. All right, institutional frameworks are also related to sustainability, but I believe this will be tackled at the other session when they speak about land ownership and water rights. Another point that I was thinking about is the government structures and cultural differences in the cultures and languages. And on the one hand, I think we tend to put it as a benefit that we have because we understand different issues in a different way. It's very good, right? Because we should not think the same way. The world would be too boring, right? We should have a diversity of opinions, a diversity of approaches. This would allow us to come up with measures that will be more valuable to different communities. In some cases, it might be a disadvantage if we don't understand each other, right? We talked about this interdisciplinary research. And in those interdisciplinary collaborations, it sometimes happens that everyone has a different definition of the same term. And you used to work on an interdisciplinary project for 2 years, 3 years, and everyone is speaking about sustainability. And then you figure everyone understands the term in a completely different way. Everyone is heading in a different direction. Right? And after some time say, wait, we talk about the same, but we have a misunderstanding here. So I believe we need to make sure that we're on the same page. That's why I mentioned at the beginning the importance of defining the sustainability and understanding, making sure that we speak about the same. And then weighting those different economic, environmental, and social issues accordingly. And also, I believe the cultural diversity is one of the aspects that will help us with understanding each other better. Because those issues are overlapping in terms of the importance and the problems that we face in each of the countries, but they affect us all, as we talked about the common resource issues, and we talked about externalities, right? So we are all affected. We are all in the same place in terms of the need to find the response. And the cultural diversity and the different perspective, understanding the issue from many different angles is much better than just looking at one problem just from one point of view. And in terms of research collaborations, I think it's a great event here and a great attempt to carry on with different research projects. How can it be done, or how do we continue if we want to take it further in terms of research projects and workshops and funding? A standard research approach, as we know it as academics, right? Maybe some case study examples or field work and surveying people in the regions might be helpful.
Perhaps we can take that point for the discussion later.
Yes, definitely.
Because
Okay, I need to end. This is my, I think this is my last slide, I wanted to emphasize the importance of regional and sectoral differentiation when we talk about those issues, temporal aspects also, and data collection. All right, this is an example that emphasizes the last point that I'm talking about. This is what we found for the Rio Grande, a huge diversity of results for those 3 states, just along one river, both for different sectors, for different users, and the water source, surface water and groundwater. All right, and those are the questions that Jordan sent us as at the beginning. I thought I would just post them here for us all to keep them in front of, or maybe if you have something printed out, it's perfectly fine. But it's
Also, so we can keep them probably there. Thank you very much. Well, but that saved us some time that probably we didn't want all to speak, so that's okay. So thank you very much. It's clear that there are several topics that directly relate to scarcity and abundance in our common areas. Certainly water, but also how do we create scarcities by population growth is a topic that I picked up, and also this point of the tragedy of commons can be particularly poignant when the resources are scarce. So if we move to the presentation, I'm going to introduce. She also probably you know her anyway. So Natalia Martinez Tagüeña is a researcher and professor at the Instituto Potosino de IPICYT. Her work has concentrated on the Sonora Andesa, where she has specialized in analysis and identification of plants to understand subsistence and climate in the past. She participated in several research projects in Costa Rica and Mexico, studying early settlers and agriculture, as well as coastal adaptations and human impacts on the environment. She has experience in archaeology and paleobotany and has collaborated with members of indigenous communities to map their cultural landscape. Dr. Martinez currently co-directs a paleoclimate and archaeology project on the coast of Sonora and is a collaborator in the project towards the residency of socio-ecosystems in the dry areas of Mexico. She received a BS in anthropology with a specialization in archaeology from the University of the Americas in Puebla, and her MS and PhD in environmental anthropology from the University of Arizona in Tucson. So then perhaps you can also give us your thoughts about scarcity and abundance in our borders. Thank you.
Sure. I don't have slides. I just want to kind of give a few points to create discussion. So really when I thought about this topic, what came to mind, and it's really what I'm working on, it's a bioculture, right? Try to see not biotic or natural resource separate and then cultural resource separate, but trying to see them together. So, and not just from a biocultural heritage definition where, plants and animals have a linguistic component, a knowledge system. They have, in some cases, a sacred use, for local populations, but more into also like a conceptual using social theory, to really understand how these non-human agents, they actually do have agency, and they are part of social practices, right? So they are like recreated and created. They represent history, identity, memory for local populations. So I think it's important here to raise that, to try to see these two combine. And if we, and what I'm interested, what my research is trying to combine local knowledge and scientific knowledge, and not prioritizing one over the other. So what I hard learned from this. So going back to the social theory, I use a lot a guy named Timothy Mitchell. That his book is called Rule of Experts, and he bases for you that are interested in social theory. He uses like Durkheim, Marx, and Derrida, and then uses this to try to not only explain how these non-human actors have agency, but how by that understanding of the real and the abstract, we can actually make it to a better public policy, to try to understand politics today. So political ecology is also doing that, and a lot of theory of materiality from geography is really pointing us to okay, let's not see natural resources separated from cultural, like try to see them intertwined. And really local populations don't see it that way. They see the environment and plants and animals as alive as them and as interacting. And in the past, in their myth of origins, they were human themselves. So I think by working with local populations, we learn that not to see this dichotomy between nature and culture, but to actually see them integrated. So what I've learned from my experiences with working with indigenous communities in Sonora, especially with the Comcac, is how the desert and the resources are not really there to serve us. This idea of the sustainability sciences that talk about the value of nature or how nature is here to serve us, I think it's very Western. It's a very Western concept, and it comes even from the Bible. How nature is there to serve humans, and by talking to local populations, you realize that not. I mean, there's not a dichotomy, and they don't see nature. And even from our experience yesterday with Don Flor, I mean, he's trying to adapt to the environment, and he uses the plants and the resources, but he's not trying to modify them or to work on the environment as we from other cultures do. So that's one part I wanted to raise. And the other one was like this, from working with these people, you see how they work with the scarcity and abundance. I mean, they really there's moments where the seasonality of the resources are very abundant, and then they deal with that. And then there's a lot of water, the rainy season. And then they deal with the scarcity easily too. They have a movement pattern, and they understand the environment very well, and they're adapted by millennia to this environment. So I think we have a lot to learn from that, and sometimes what we see as foreigners as scarce or as abundant, local communities don't see it that way. They kind of live in this cycle, and they have adapted through millennia to this scarcity and abundance. And we used to think that hunter-gatherers, for example, the Comcac indigenous community where I work, sometimes we think that they just move through the land looking for resources and plants and water, but no, I mean, it's a complex system of other issues of the land that they consider important. So just another issue to keep in mind. And then kind of talking about it, Hali, again, the notion of value of nature. I mean, I think for us it's more monetary, more economic, but for local populations it's not like that. The value comes from memories, identity, even, I mean, a lot of times it's sacred. It has to do with even how you conceptualize yourself as an individual. So we also have to keep those notions in mind that have been expressed in a lot of publications like David Harvey and so forth. And then with this, I just want to wrap up that local knowledge is equally important than scientific, and we have this challenge of how to use frameworks. I mentioned a few of social theories that have dealt with that, but also methodological, talking about transdisciplinary and talking about participatory research, and how we really need to work on methodologies to really integrate these different knowledge systems that are not sometimes we want to, but it's not intuitively, and it's hard to compare, and we just have to keep working. I think there's a lot of potential to work on that. And on that, I just want to raise that there's a lot of literature on tech, right? Traditional ecological knowledge. And we are aware that indigenous communities have all this immense ecological knowledge of the land. But we have left kind of aside ranchers, local, like either Mexicans or Americans that are not indigenous, but that are pastoralists or agriculturalists that also have a lot of knowledge. And we have kind of left that to the side a little bit as academics as well. That's not traditional, that's not millenarial. And we need to kind of, I see that gap in terms of a scarcity of an abundance in the literature of what I'm interested on. And well, and just talking about that dichotomy, also the importance of the historical context, also because of my background as historian, archaeologist, and in terms of how I conceptualize Sonora. You know, I started working with the Paleo-Indian people, seeing these areas like the whole America, you know, like the peopling of the Americas. And then I started working on hunter-gatherers and early agriculturists and how different cultures start to develop once they become sedentary. And then in the Sonora and Arizona, then, I mean, through the history, you know, you need to understand the historical space and time context of each area so that we can really talk about resource management. I believe, I mean, we need to understand these trajectories and how people assign meaning and value to different resources through time and through space. And I think that's very important to consider, not only for the understanding of these of the resources they have, but to propose management of these resources. We really need to understand the historical context of these regions. And I think I'll leave it there. Just try to promote more discussion.
Fantastic, thank you very much. I certainly pick up this this concept of the fact that both abundance and scarcity must have a cultural component of what is much and what is little, and how to manage these scarcities and these abundances, and whether or not we think that there is an equivalence in the different types of knowledge regarding how ecosystems or systems in general work. I think we cannot make the transition towards sustainability if we don't incorporate all these knowledges. So now I would like to know what you all think about this. I mean, our remit is to discuss and to propose how to deal with this paradox or even to use it. So, Jürgen, please.
We have on the screen 4 important questions. If I may, I'd like to offer an answer to each of them. The first one, you use the word challenge. Let me give you a story about 80 years ago. There was a world-renowned historian at Oxford University. His name is Arnold Toynbee. He wrote a 10-volume story of world history. Fortunately, the publishers brought out a 1-volume summary, the only one I ever managed. But the story which impressed me immensely for the interpretation of human history over thousands of years, Toynbee used the concepts of here's a challenge. How did people respond to the challenge? Example, and the only one I give you from Toynbee, Sahara, way back, forget exact time. Gorgeous rainfall, plants grew beautifully, animals grazed. Climate changed. There has been climate change in the past. No more rainfall, dry land develops. What should we do? The elderly said, be patient. Next year will be better. It wasn't. One group of entrepreneurial young folks said, we move, we go south. They found an environment that was even more challenging. And the third group said, well, why don't we go east? Who knows? Eventually, they came on the Nile, and they developed one of the best water-driven cultures the world has ever seen. Summary, for our case, we have to see a connection between the challenges and a hopefully intelligent response. The challenges I see, I agree with you to take the Rio Grande Basin shared between our two countries as an example, are less water because of climate change and climate variation. 2, more salinity because of ancient agricultural practices and some of the tributaries, in particular the Pecos River, bring saline water naturally. 3, I talked about it a little earlier, so I will be short on this here. Loss of storage after we built these wonderful reservoirs because of sediment building up in the reservoir. What I didn't mention, should have mentioned, obviously you can do something about it, even if the engineering initially was lousy. You could dig it up. I think it can be done. Everybody so far says it's too expensive. It urgently needs to be studied and reconsidered. The regions we are talking about are rich because of the sediment. It is the sediment that made possible, coming over thousands of years during the flood season, made possible agriculture. And we added in the last 100 years modern engineering to make that agriculture more intensive, more efficient, creating in the process some problems too. But the economic success of those regions is another challenge because it attracts more and more people. So that may be the dichotomy we need to urgently address. How make it possible for more people to enjoy and at the same time live with less water? What interventions, if any, have been put in place to address these issues? Number 1, example of the city of El Paso, right in the middle of our region of interest. 40% of drinking water is lost to leakages in ancient distribution systems, iron pipes that rust. Well, they have undertaken a major addressing that issue, a major progress is made. Second, same city, an enormous educational effort on telling people, families, everybody, this is the way to use water efficiently, this is the way you use water inefficiently. And it reflects your problem price. The price incentive, namely paying less for your monthly water bill, plus the educational effort, has made an enormous difference in the city of El Paso, with possibilities of copies elsewhere on how much each family uses. Third example, there was a time, this is a comment on the side, it should not be recorded, when our political system was very forward-looking, the US political system, there was a very forward-looking Senator, Kay Hutchinson. She convinced the US Senate, and the House agreed, and the White House didn't disagree, to invest a massive amount of money in a place called Fort Bliss, a few miles north of El Paso. First, inland desalination plant for the aquifer water, which in that region happens to be saline. All the experts had said, won't work, too expensive. What do you do with the stuff that's left over? All the problems have been addressed. The Fort Bliss facility has been in action now for over 10 years. It is a model to be looked at and to be copied in other places. I think I said enough.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. That's really a lot of food for thought, and we are not going to quote you on the last one, but we are going to keep it in mind. So I suspect there are all more comments to have. Yes, come on, I can see you. Your name is Dr.
Doug Light Network for the Environmental Protection Agency, and I agree with everything you said. I think we fund projects in Mexico, and we are considered a funder of last resort, which means we don't come in until the house has been built. There's no wastewater collection or treatment, and we'll come in and help Mexico. We have to have an equal match of money from Mexico, but we'll come in depending on how the project rates and ranks and how much money we have available, but we'll help Mexico out. This has had a huge benefit in providing 90% of Mexico, of the border region, we consider that within 100 kilometers of the border, with wastewater collection and treatment versus close to 50% throughout the rest of Mexico. What we are not able to do, though, is think about more sustainable uses of water, reuse, for example. And it's crazy, and I'm going to go talk about this in my presentation a little bit later, but in the Tijuana River, in the New River, in the Santa Cruz River, every one of these, the United States is telling Mexico, we don't want your wastewater. We don't want your water. And it's to me, it's crazy that we're building ocean desalination plants. And meanwhile, telling at significantly, it's 25% the amount of energy to treat wastewater to potable standards versus an ocean desal plant. But because it's the ocean desalination is more sort of amenable to the public, it tends to get a lot more private investors, et cetera. But I think we really need to quit treating, and I know it's been said so many times before, but not only in every one of these are we telling Mexico we don't want their water, but we have significantly changed. Tijuana River used to be a ephemeral river. We turned it into perennial river. New River used to be ephemeral. We turned it into perennial. Santa Cruz, we've completely changed the ecosystem thanks to the treatment of how we treat wastewater.
So I see a common topic here that perhaps sometimes the challenges that our common borders and perhaps any area face should be really seen as opportunities. And I was thinking when Jürgen was talking, now you mentioned about the rivers, that understanding the actual ecosystem may be a way of getting a benefit from it. For instance, if we have just the reservoirs with water and we don't manage the environment, say as a lake, of course it's going to be to build up the sediment. It's only green algae there just growing and then falling down. But it may be a way of managing the system as a oligotrophic system, and also using the sediment in a creative way. So yes, we have to be creative in the way we address the challenges. But there must be other views. You don't have a view. You must have a view, but anyway, you can pass just now. But then there's people behind, and then you please.
Just as a theme, it seems like the challenge is people have different perspectives on what is scarce and what is abundant. So you're seeing some things as a solution and others are not. So there just seems to be a really big challenge. That's it.
So I was listening to a podcast about a week ago, and they were talking about the competition for groundwater in aquifers and how there's still water there, but the aquifers are getting lower, and the only people who can access it are those who can afford to modify their pumps to get deeper and deeper and deeper, which eventually they won't be able to do either. But right now, that's kind of the only way to do it. So how do you shift the mentality from, oh, this resource is becoming scarce, let's work together to preserve it, to this resource is becoming scarce, I need to be the first person to access it, especially when there's like an economic impact on, on the lack or the moderation thereof for, for crops and farmers and things like that. People were saying, well, if I stop using it, trying to be, conscientious, then there's nothing to stop my neighbor from taking the water that I'm not using. So how do you, I guess, establish that kind of mutual trust and understanding that it needs to be preserved and not, fought for or fought after? How do you kind of make that mental shift?
Answer. An example. It goes back to the desal plant. There is a considerable leftover. It's called the brine. It's highly toxic. And one of the main reasons to say you can't have desal plant away from the ocean, where you put the brine in the ocean and let the fish eat it, was exactly where do you put the stuff? It might influence the groundwater. So a group of entrepreneurs moved in, I know 3 of them, created a initially quite small firm next to Fort Bliss and said, with our ingenuity and understanding of what this brine consists of, we can make it 90% into saleable chemicals. And they did. And the company functions. Example.
Jade will also say something about, and then Chris. Also in central Mexico, just as a parenthesis, there used to be a lake. It was managed by the local communities, and then an external culture came in from Spain and didn't know how to manage it. But one consequence is that this was a closed basin and has a very high concentration of caustic, how to say, sodium hydroxide, which now is commercially exploited. So it can be done. I mean, it was a salty lake, was lots of environmental problems, but they were transformed into an opportunity.
I wanted to add to the comment by Jordan. How do we change people's perception on the resource use and managing it sustainably? I believe this is a question of a generational change and educating young people about sustainability. It will not happen from one year to another, but we need to start early. And I believe facilitating educational measures early on, maybe as a spillover of a workshop like this, or I know there is a lot of outreach to local communities. This is a great investment into the future that I believe will help us achieve all those, or maybe deal with some of those issues much better than we are dealing with them right now. Once children are taught early on and they just grow up in this sustainable way of thinking.
Well, hopefully, of course. So the two of you.
No, I just wanted to add also to this comment that in my opinion, sometimes the problem is that there's like a top-down imposition in populations of how they need to manage it and how they need to view the resource. And in my opinion, it's like there's a lot of need of local governance, right? Like not just like bring it down and try to generate that from the community. And if the community sees it as their own, their own idea, their own project, then there's a way more potential and that's why I do not necessarily agree on the tragedy of the commons concept. I mean, in some cases it is the case, but in others it has been external issues that create these problems also in the communities. I mean, I'm not romanticizing the communities. There's also problems in there, but just like avoiding these top-down implementations.
Well, let's see if I can articulate this. I really like the comments by Natalia, and thinking about this, how to manage local resources. I think one of the big problems of unsustainable use of natural resources is this concept of like universal or global well-being. Everybody wants to have their gardens or like with grass or whatever, and all this local knowledge of how to connect or interact in a healthy way with the environment is like somehow been erased, and not appreciating the local way of being and like interacting with nature. Why is that California has to have all these green grasses and people water their gardens? Now they're like, I understand there's some sort of prohibition on like watering the gardens, and like the vegetation of the gardens are not anymore as they used to be, like in the global understanding of the nice house and everything. Why does people in Mexico City have to live like in New York City? It's not the same thing. Why is that we have to have our rivers piped and not seeing them anymore? It's like this globalization of well-being, how to live well, and not how to live well locally with the resources and the context, that the ecological context that you have, the historical context that you have. So that's just a thought.
Please.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I wanted to jump in with two comments, and you know, I think part of what we're doing in this overall exercise is visioning a utopian future. So just bear with me while I get very, you know, fuzzy-eyed, you know, glassy-eyed and fuzzy and warm and everything. Okay, so and I'll problematize some of it myself. So one is I actually think that the region we're talking about, I made some very brief comments on that, actually has an incredible abundance of renewable energy, solar energy, and there can be other forms as well. But and we're learning and we're seeing that with the right kinds of management and technologies and local use and perceptions, that energy can substitute or transform, or it can be used in intelligent ways to bring about well-being of some kind, locally defined, all of those things. How we get there and everything is still a problem. What I did want to say, we did a recent paper. It's called the paradox of abundance. This is a paper on solar energy adoption in the Navajo Nation. People we talked to, and two of the research members were native. One Navajo himself, one was Cherokee, but he seemed to have a good entrance with the community and everything. And what we found was there's a strong opposition to solar energy right now. Not solar energy per solar energy, but to the institutions that deliver solar energy, okay? And so I think one of the things that we have to learn is technology and these kinds of choices are not neutral, or put in a positive way with this utopian vision that I want to have is, how can we have local empowerment of technology choices like solar energy? How could we do this in a democratic way that's accessible, where the sustainability impacts associated with, some impacts will be there. Some transmission lines and panels have to be put with the current technology. Who knows where it may be going, in the future. But even now, I think those things can be managed, let's say, or can be brought in if there's local, control, which is done in a cultural way, or a local, accountability kind of way. So how do we think about energy, which may help us get somewhat further with some of these other pressing challenges we have? So that's sort of the one. I know it sounds technological optimism, and we're just going to put solar panels and everybody's going to, go into the sunset and, there's no more problems. So I don't believe that, but I do think it's certainly something that's worth, looking into. The other, and this is something Natalia mentioned, which I want to try to bring to the group, and Anna's comments right now, I think, hit on that as well, is that our very notions of scarcity and abundance are culturally defined. And so what we understand as being abundant and well-being and good and everything comes from a very, culturally conceived way. And so some of the choices around indigenous knowledge and scientific knowledge in a Western construction or something, partly is, how do you use this particular agave lechuguilla to get ixtle and make some products? And it's fascinating. It's and many of those practices will go on. But what I took from Don Flor was not only the low impact of living on the land, but that the very understanding of abundance. If you would ask him, does he have an abundant life? He would say yes. And yet, if you would count the things which are in his stock of his house or his, his belongings or his bank account or whatever, it's 100 times less, it's 1,000 times less, it's 1,000,000 times less than Bill Gates or even any of us, right? Who have got on planes and burnt up carbon to go here and there, and have all these different things which we have to have or somehow, right? And so the notion of abundance and well-being is also, and scarcity is itself coming out of a knowledge system or a value system. So, yeah.
Thank you very much. I actually was keeping some of your comments for the end, but I think is if our obligation now is to think about scarcity and abundance and how this is a paradox. Indeed, the abundance of, for instance, energy can bring about well-being. Perhaps if there is no water, electric energy from the sun can make fresher environments somehow that reduce our need of water. So there must be technological solutions which can reduce the impact on those resources that are not really abundant. So the challenge, one challenge, is how to make use of these opportunities that are provided by the resources that are abundant in order to make up for the ones that are not. But one point, and now I'm going to address like a devil's advocate and talk about the problems of dealing with cultural appropriation and the tragedy of commons. I agree that in small communities, it must be possible to get everyone organized looking for the common benefit. But unfortunately, I come from evolutionary biology, and I work often under the concept of evolutionarily stable strategies, which is the type of a strategy that cannot be invaded by cheaters. And the larger it is your human community, the more easy it is for cheaters or for people who are not cooperative to get in and get a free ride. I do not believe that in big cities or in large communities, wherever you place them, you can trust on good faith and shared values, especially in a globalized world where people can move, can get ideas from other places, and can cheat the system. And so another challenge is how do we establish checks and balances that permit, say, the society to come up with definitions of what they want, say, not gardens of grass, but perhaps gardens of agaves, but then prevent cheaters from walking in, because there's an element of human nature. We can discuss a lot about what is human nature, but we have to face it now. It's actually part of the problem we are living now in our common areas. We have not touched on, because we are academics and we don't want to touch on that, but safety, security, violence are problems in our common areas that are not going to disappear if we have a community suddenly saying, okay, we want to have arid gardens and to manage in a reasonable way our resources. No, those problems are not going to disappear. We have to deal with some realities and have to find ways of convincing communities and then enforcing decisions that are democratically arrived at. And so it's not that I don't share some view of a rosy future, only I think the path is not necessarily rosy. But we have been there. Humans have been there. What you mentioned about differences that are cultural, what you mentioned about cultural differences, also in the perception of wealth and scarcity, we can find reflected in history. So any medieval king was really a poor character if it was translated to our time. They didn't have objects. They had very few objects, and they were ill, and they didn't have medicines, etc. They were only relatively rich compared to other medieval characters. And so an important element of how our communities can feel happier about the environment where they live, is that there is what Anna was talking about, more equality within their communities. And that is a goal that I think is worth also looking for and fighting for. So, but still, some of you have not commented, and I wonder, are you now happy to share your thoughts? Or yes, you are. Thank you very much. Sandra.
Okay, I think that we have Sandra. Okay. I work here in IPICYT. I form the consortium of CITSA. Is
You can speak in Spanish and we will translate the people next to us.
ok. Yo trabajo aquí en IPICYT, en un consorcio para el desarrollo de las zonas áridas, precisamente. Y pues yo creo que sí, tenemos mucho trabajo que hacer. Me especializo precisamente en microbiología. Entonces, lo que yo estoy trabajando ahorita es precisamente encontrar pues microorganismos que podamos utilizar para ayudar a esas comunidades y hacerlas sustentables, ¿no? Darles como un valor agregado a esos lugares. Entonces, esa es como mi aportación en esta área. Y con respecto a lo que han estado hablando, lo que pienso es que, pues sí, requerimos una educación desde niños, desde pequeños, para poder, no llegar a imponer, sino aprender y poder, transferir ese conocimiento que nosotros tenemos como investigadores a las comunidades, y aquellos que no tienen pues el conocimiento, y enseñar a los niños, precisamente pues que estamos todos habitando ese lugar y que si no lo cuidamos pues realmente pues no lo vamos a acabar.
Yeah. So I was translating you simultaneously, but the general idea that Sandra shared with us is that she works here and she works at a consortium. Her specialty has to do with microbes and how to use microbiomes to help the communities to achieve sustainability goals. But she agrees with the point that was Jad mentioned earlier, that education, and particularly working with kids, may be a way of reaching eventually these sustainability goals in our common areas. Es más o menos eso, ¿no? Sí. So I suppose we have more comments. Sí. Hay dos personas atrás que no han hablado, pero tú puedes repetir mientras tanto.
I was just telling you when you're talking about the sort of bottom-up idea of water, of just resource management, but it made me think about one of the largest supporters of San Diego's effort to reuse wastewater for indirect potable reuse, because it was never a very popular idea, has been really the Surfrider Foundation, which is, you know, as a culture, surfing is in San Diego as important as it comes. And it's because of the fact that they're obviously, you know, it affects their ability to, if we don't do this, the alternative is building more and more ocean desalination plants. And so they have been a really significant force behind, and they're mostly young people. And so it's really changed the attitude towards this idea of, you know, it used to be toilet to tap and everybody would want to stay far away. And now it's, people are really much more supportive of it, you know, because Surfrider, it's a cool organization and they're behind it. So it's interesting.
Sí, vas a tener tus minutos, nos quedan 20. So please, por favor.
Thank you. My name is Leonardo Chapa. I am a professor with the Division of Environmental Sciences here at IPICYT, and I specialized on wildlife ecology, mostly birds, but we have studied mammals as well. I think something I agree with many of the ideas that have been thrown here on this group. From the biological point of view, what we have seen on birds is that organisms in dry areas adapt to these environments because these environments are, you can say, unstable. Like we can have 2 or 3 drought years, and then we have rain years, and it's unstable. And we have seen like hummingbirds that adapt to whatever is available. Like we see hummingbirds eating from fruits, not necessarily from the flowers. So they have this capacity to adapt, and I think that will give resilience to these systems. And then from the social point of view, I am not too much of a sociologist, but I think what we need is to be able to change people's views. And I think that's a challenge because of the way society works, because on television or even on the street, they sell us this idea. So they put this photo of a happy family buying some special kind of house, and everybody wants to be the same. But I think what we need is diversity. I just went to a bird conference in Tucson, and it's very similar to this area in a way, but it's different as well. So the biological system is similar because it's a dry land as well, but it's different the way the city is organized. So here everybody wants to have grass on their yards, but what I saw, at least on the northern part of Tucson, is that the backyard is basically the arid ecosystem, and it looks very nice. So I think we need that kind of diversity, and everybody is different. So we don't want to be the same as, what they sell on the streets or on the TV. And I think that's very difficult because as ecologists, we are the minority. But I think we need to be facing into that if we want to be able to adapt to these challenges.
No, I was gonna just add to what you were saying earlier as the devil advocate. No, but from my experience in the community I work in Sonora, I mean they're very individualistic. I mean they're not community as it is, and also that has allowed them to adapt through millennia, being selfish and being so. I mean, I'm just throwing that there's like even in local communities is that concept of competition, and so that's also there. And I was just gonna say that I think there's people doing education, sustainability, like environmental education, and from the University of Colima, and I really like their vision that is not like it's not informing, right? It's not informing people and educating, but it's more like a formative view of sustainable education. So I think that has a lot of potential in what we're discussing here. And the other is like this boundary work. I mean, now I kind of just mentioned local populations and local knowledge, but really the way to push forward for a future that it's better is this multi-sector that you mentioned also in the morning. I mean, to do sustainable initiatives where you have the local communities there on the table, and you have academies, and you have the government sector, and you have NGOs, and you have all the actors that are involved in one area. And then without that collaboration, like it's gonna be very hard to find solutions.
I'd like to go to Jadwiga's comments on water pricing. Very important question. Very tough to address, I think, due to legal differences. In Mexico, as I understand it, water is a public good. As much as air is a public good, you shouldn't charge for it. In the United States, water is a private good. Private good means if it is underground, it belongs to the owner of the land. If it is river water, at least in the American West, as a part of bringing people and agriculture to the West over several hundred years, the principle was introduced: whoever arrives first has the right to the water. First in place, first in right. Outdated. Most people would agree. Very difficult to override and say it should be considered not first in place, first in right, but what is the most beneficial use of the water, where it should go with high priority. There are some attempts to make that happen. But I think the limits, because of these legal issues to establish a water market, both in Mexico and here, are high. If you look at some other places in the world, my key dream example of how it has worked is a river some of you may never have heard of. Is the Murray-Darling in Australia, where water markets were established, and one of the rules it has been applied to by the government is to encourage people to not take some of their water rights, be funded for that from public sources, and leave the water in the river for ecological purposes. So I think it might fit. My first in place, first in right might fit your, are these processes in place that are no longer relevant? I think that is certainly true and very tough to overcome.
Comments on this? Well, I do actually, because I think that there are probably plethora of ways in which we can entice people to work for a common or commonly defined benefit. We, for instance, have mentioned about education, but specifically, we can even not give like material benefits, but civil pride, for instance, can be a drive in some communities. So you are the first in doing this. You are an example in the nation for doing that. So there's probably several ways in which we can entice communities to look at, to define, and try to achieve sustainable goals. But again, our obligation is to look into how to deal with this particular paradox. And we have not mentioned, for instance, all the valuable richness of these areas that is minerals. I think in the two sides of the border, certainly in the Mexican side, there is a lot of mining. And mining, of course, is the devil incarnate, to use, again, the devil's word, because extracting minerals is environmentally aggressive. But yet again, we can have enough energy to find processes that are energy expensive, but can generate ways of not being so messy with the environment when extracting ores. And so there's an area of opportunity that can be looked at. And I think it would be very important, perhaps, in specific areas along our borders, very broadly defined, to look into what are the richness, the local richnesses, what are the local challenges, and generate, perhaps through research and also through socio-ecological analysis and interviews, etc., to generate agendas. I don't think we can have a single agenda for the whole transborder areas. But we can have an agenda of developing local agendas for research and then for working towards sustainable goals. So what do you think of that? Yes? You say yes? You vote?
And I would comment that there's the approach of communicating what we think others need to believe. But what hasn't come up is a discussion or a methodology for negotiations and trade-offs when there are not common understandings. So perhaps that could be something to think about.
No, we're not going to finish before time. Come on. Jordi, yes.
I don't have a question, but I was going to say.
Still, you can say it with the microphone and expand.
Well, no, so you guys have all brought up great points. I mean, of course, we talked a lot about water, about human behavior. I was glad you brought minerals to our attention as well. In terms of, I know some people are working on these things, which is why I also wanted to talk about maybe strategies that exist that could be built upon or modified, lessons that we could learn from things that have already been done, maybe not done well, but attempted. So I kind of wanted to address some of those things too.
So perhaps what you are suggesting is that there is a task that should be a relatively early task, which is to collect information and organize it on our common areas and sustainable projects, and also in general descriptions of how things are in terms of socio-ecological problems as a starting point, because we have different ideas of what is going on and we have different knowledges of this, and perhaps a coherent database is probably an important thing to have before we start moving to the next step. I think that's a very good idea. Yeah. Would you concur? Yes.
A question for you. When you said maybe more of a decentralized or a regional type of consultation or something, priority setting, I don't know exactly what words you used, but problem identification or solutions. Can you expand on that a bit?
Yes, I was thinking that perhaps in some areas, for instance, in Sonora near the border, there are mines, and there are the environmental problems associated with mines. Also, the wealth that comes with that type of economic activity. Perhaps then the local communities would have a view of how to approach sustainability that incorporates those mines and the other wealths, the other abundances of the area, in order to work for a common good future. But in other areas, for instance, in Cuatro Ciénegas, the water is more of an issue, and also the academic and recreational value of such an important special place like the Cuatro. I don't know whether you know Cuatro Ciénegas, but it's a very special place from biological reasons. It has been studied by NASA and other groups of scientists because it recreates some of the attributes that we believe led to the early life in the planet, and the microbiota that lives there is comparable to the microbes that live in ancient seas. So it has a cultural, scientific, and recreational value. It's some fantastic lakes in that area. The sustainability goals in that area, in the area of Cuatro Ciénegas, do not have to be the same as in the area where there are mines in Sonora. So I think we can approach them in different ways. That's more or less what I was thinking of. Jürgen, there's you.
A second answer to the same question. We experimented partially successfully in two sub-regions, sub-basins of the Rio Grande. One we call the Paso del Norte, which is part of New Mexico, part of Texas, part across the border with Juarez as the principal town. All three having major irrigated agriculture and growing cities. It worked wonderfully when we brought together local stakeholders having to do with water. Who were the main stakeholders? The irrigation districts, very powerful institutions where there is irrigated agriculture, the city water utilities, a group of NGOs, environmental groups, things like that, and some representatives of local government. The team was successful in saying we exchange information that otherwise we didn't have, and we use it in joint planning. The team failed when nobody stepped forward after foundation funding ran out and we couldn't renew it, to say, we adopt this group and you become a part of a larger enterprise. In group number 4 later today, I will talk about what I think should happen in such a situation. The Paso Norte had a special problem with desal. I talked about it briefly. In the lower Rio Grande, downstream from Amistad and Falcon, the aquifer is not saline. The water situation is quite different because the principal water supply here, we rarely mention this in the US, comes from Mexico. It's the Conchas River, provides 2/3 of the river for the lower Rio Grande. So we had a major problem to consider how do we deal with the recurrent drought situations, and Mexico cannot meet the delivery it has promised to give each year under the 1944 treaty out of the Rio Conchas. Again, it helped to get some of the tensions boiled down at least. It didn't solve the problem, but we had the same problem that these were temporary water task forces. They were not institutionalized, and they are not institutionalized. I think that's a major task to consider. Bring together irrigation districts, city water utilities, industry water users, and some local agencies. In our El Paso group, for example, EPA played a wonderful role, the regional director of EPA. Anyway, an example of what might happen locally as opposed to the basin as a whole.
Thank you very much. So I see Vaughan here. I don't know whether you can bring enough here to contribute to this with some closing remarks, perhaps. Yes.
I will provide nothing of substance because I've been going back and forth and then drinking coffee and being on the phone, except for, and because generally speaking, there's the expression, the drunk looks for the keys under the street light because that's the light that he sees. I'm going to comment on the last bit that I heard, because I think that this question of, it's something that we've been really, really interested in, is this question of how do you think about sustainability in the context of a very place-based set of priorities around sustainability. And that is actually, whether it's a political set of priorities, whether there are political priorities that say sustainability is pegged by education and everything else flows from there, versus, as you're saying, the issue of what are the components in the human or environmental system that are the drivers for sustainability. And so I think when we look at any of the types of activities that go forward, it has to be thought about in two scales. One is the localized scale of sustainability, but then figuring out what are the bounds of the system that you're talking about in the first place. And it just seems to me that one of the really interesting conversations that's been happening over there, and I'm hearing it now here, so it's the reason why it's sort of is trying to figure out what are the bounds of the system we're talking about. And it gets a little bit to this issue of, or when you talk about drylands, it impacts so many other areas. And that, I think, actually provides opportunities for expanding the conversation to something that actually has a relevance to not only funding agencies and both sides of the two countries, but also from some of the philanthropies. I think as you were speaking to about foundations being very interested in maybe a more specific element of something.
So we are 1 minute late. If you want to make some closing remarks beyond those of one, I think otherwise, thank you very much for being here, and we should take a little time before going. We should take a little time before going. Oh, they beat us before going to the next ones. Okay, thank you very much.
Están en un receso. Okay, thank you. Okay, great. So this is Governance and Innovation. I'm Hallie Aiken. I'm from Arizona State University. We don't have a translator here, so people will speak in the language they feel most comfortable speaking in, and we'll do our best to translate into English for those who need it. One needs English to Spanish, Spanish to English translation. Is there anyone else? Okay. Yes. Well, we can sit together. So, okay. So I am here. I will be introducing our speakers. We have two speakers today. I think we are going to have some slides. Can we get those up? Okay. So I don't know which of you would like to go first. Okay. Okay. Well, that's all right. We will start with you, Jürgen Schmant. I'm not sure I said it right.
Perfect.
Okay. From the University of Texas, Austin. And then we'll follow by Ismael.
If you don't have it, here is a copy.
Is there anyone?
It should read San Luis Potosi 2. This one? Well, it's too fast.
There it is. Looks like it's up. ¿Qué pasa?
Is another one?
What do you want me to translate?
The file name.
The file name.
One. He got an old version.
Okay.
I have a new version.
He has a new version, una versión nueva. Entonces cierra eso y abre otro. No, hay cuidado. Sí. Tiene.
That's it.
Okay.
No problem.
Sí, es eso. Okay.
No, I also need a thing to advance.
Okay. And
this is it.
Yes, there you go. Okay.
Okay. This is a totally unexpected, totally overwhelming opportunity to refresh a working relationship that goes back 20 plus years. At that time, I worked out of Houston, Texas, the Woodlands, an institute created by George P. Mitchell. You remember this meeting today is made possible by the Mitchell Endowment to the National Academy. So I go back some time, and at the time, Ismael and my group worked together. We studied the lower Rio Grande Valley. And if I find the right button, the lower Rio Grande Valley on this map is mostly, as you can see from the red, in Mexico. It is downstream from the two international reservoirs that were built in the 60s, Amistad and Falcon. It depends almost for 2/3 on water coming out of Mexico, namely the Conchos tributary. 2/3 of the water in the lower Rio Grande is really Mexican water. I also worked further upstream in the place close to El Paso and across the river Juarez, where the water comes all from upstream US out of the snowpack in Colorado. Here is a closer look at the Rio Grande Basin. It starts way up in Colorado, traverses New Mexico. In New Mexico, something very important happened. Exactly 102 years ago, the first modern, massive engineered reservoir was built in the world. It's called Elephant Butte Reservoir. In the meantime, rivers of the kind of the Rio Grande worldwide have been equipped with large reservoirs. The additional comment on this map, I mentioned the conchos. On the opposite side is a tributary called the Pecos. The Pecos delivers 1/3 downstream. However, with a big disadvantage, the Pecos water isn't good quality, it's saline. The Conchos water is of very good quality. One important difference, the lower Rio Grande is basically river water, and whatever aquifers they have are good water. The Positino Norte region depends enormously on aquifers, most of which are brackish water. I mentioned in the session before, some of you may have been here, that part of this is being addressed by the Fort Bliss desal plant. We can talk about it later. Okay, summarize. This river is special. Mountain snowpack is all important for the river water. In the flooding season, for thousands and thousands of years, something very important happened. The water came together with fertile soil, and that soil was deposited on the banks further down in New Mexico, in Texas, in Mexico, and it made possible a whole new economy, first for native populations, later for growing populations in the US and Mexico. It's the only place, the only way to have irrigation there, because rainfall is scarce. It's an arid or semi-arid climate. In addition to the dams and reservoirs, this is what we did to the river. Don't try to decipher the details, but over and over again, some weird, some reservoir, some distribution arrangement, a heavily engineered river. These are the challenges the river faces. Climate change, lots of discussion in the sessions we had so far. Climate variation, very little discussion so far. There's something the experts call the Southern Oscillation, which is a band of drought-prone regions south of the equator, north of the equator, and for reasons I do not understand, I'm not a technical person, my field is policy, the Rio Grande irrigation areas move more into the drought-prone areas as time moves by. Reservoir sedimentation, I mentioned often, I won't mention it again right now. Brackish groundwater, at least around El Paso and Juarez. Significant population growth, cities, and gradually, constantly decreased in-stream flow. I don't know if this is tall enough, but what can we do to face the challenges? I put a question mark behind number one, new reservoirs. The question mark, we have built reservoirs where it makes sense. Sediment removal, a question of new engineering, new funding. It's expensive, but it can be done. It's an option. It hasn't been taken seriously. I think it should be looked at very seriously. The biggest one, make irrigation efficient. There is a tremendous increase in efficiency possible. I'll say a little more in a little while. The same, many of the city distribution systems are old, aging, pipes are breaking, rusting, water is lost. It needs to be repaired. In some places it has been repaired. The farmers have options. Some they like, some they don't like use less water efficient crops. Yeah, but the market, they like the water efficient crops, so it's a tough one. Rain harvesting. I don't know enough to say how significant a contribution it can make, but from the little I know, it is important. It should be practiced. And then something at the policy level we call integrated water management. Consider groundwater and surface water together. Make it happen across state boundaries, across international boundaries. And finally, really the one I perhaps judge as the highest priority, develop a stakeholder organization for each of your subbasins. And I define the subbasins, given the nature of these engineered rivers, as the area that has been created upstream a reservoir, the lake, and downstream where the cities and the irrigation district until the next reservoir comes, begins. When we did this study 20 years ago for EPA and NSF on the lower Rio Grande, maybe the most important finding, overwhelming finding, we made intensive contacts with some irrigation districts, farmers, and they agreed they could deal with 30% less water 20 or so years into the future if they did A, B, and C. And they knew what A, B, and C had to be. If that applies generally, and I don't know if it does worldwide, it's an extremely important finding. The print, I think, is terrible. Let me just mention the population side. The subbasin Lower Rio Grande downstream from Falcon, between 2000 and 2030, we are halfway there, will reach 4.9 million. It was 2.5 or something when we did this study. This is the region I'm working on these days. It's called the Paso del Norte. It reaches from southern New Mexico with the Elephant Butte, the principal reservoir, all the way down to a place which the map doesn't show, but all American literature mentions. On the map here, it says Presidio. It's very close to a point called Fort Quitman. At Fort Quitman, because of what we have done to the river and how we use the water, the Rio Grande is a trickle. It is renewed further downstream by the contours from Mexico that I referred to. The problems in the Paso del Norte, again sedimentation, again climate change, now measured, snowpack is down. The climate variation, this southern oscillation. The population grows from 2.6 million this year to 3.2 in 2040. That is the total population of El Paso in the year 2000. One big city added. Right now, agriculture uses 80+% of water. Most irrigators use surface water. Some use, in addition, groundwater, creates problems. Interaction between surface water and groundwater is critical. There's a terrible lawsuit pending still before the Supreme Court between New Mexico and Texas on who is allowed to use groundwater, pump groundwater, connected to the big problem. Brackish groundwater, the wonderful experiment in Fort Bliss, north of El Paso, to create an inland desalination plant called K. Hutchinson Desalination Plant. I talked about it enough in earlier sessions. Now comes the principal point of I want to go to the point where I say, let's do something. What is the most likely we can do? So here we have International Border and Water Commission. Two sections, one located in El Paso, the other one across the river in Juarez. Goes back to a treaty signed in the middle of World War II, 1944. Why is that treaty so special? So special that my friends who study international law say, gee, this treaty is unique in international law. What is so unique? It's called the minute system. What is a minute? The treaty says, if there's a problem that might arise in the future, let the two commissioners, one Mexican, one American, get together, convene some experts, and write a proposal. Send this proposal to Mexico City and to Washington, D.C., and now listen. If within 30 days there's no answer, what they sent becomes an addendum to the treaty. How often do you think that system has been used? Any guess? 323 times. Many of those minutes in the early days in particular are no longer relevant to us. They deal with adjustments and where the border is, but some are very important because they deal with drought management. Now, my favorite is Minute 308. Minute 308 was drafted in 2001, 2002, in the midst of one of the worst droughts we had on the Rio Grande. And its principal purpose was to adjust payments that Mexico was due from the Conchos River, but hadn't been able to make over a period of time. But then came two provisions for me out of the blue. I've never found out why they did it. It was a period where sustainable development was being discussed widely. It was a public topic. They made two suggestions. Number one, we will convene an international meeting to advise the commissioners on sustainability measures to be taken in the river. The two commissioners will then develop a sustainability plan for the Rio Grande, Rio Bravo, and since the treaty also covers the Colorado and the Tijuana River, basically they should have three plans for sustainability in the future. Now you see the last entry, nothing happened. The literature often calls it the failed minute. The literature in general is quite negative on what the IPICYT and the SELA have accomplished in their long history. I disagree with that. I think the way cooperation exists between the engineers and the staff, I have witnessed much of that, is quite unique. We have avoided major confrontations, but there is potential that has not been met. I agree with that. So let me hold out a vision. I call it a minute 308 redone, or a vision, a minute for the future. Number one, such a minute should recognize, be cognizant of the latest information that national institutions have gathered on the impact of climate change, of sedimentation, of population growth, of economic development. In the study we just finished on Tuesday this week, we found that this is not the case even in the US with regard to climate change impact in studies done by the Bureau of Reclamation, the main agent of river management on the US side. So a big task on the research and data exchange side. Number three, there should be a detailed analysis and assessment of what have we done so far and what have been the results, what worked, what didn't work. Number four, remember perhaps people mentioned earlier this morning the groundbreaking study by the National Academy on Sustainability called Our Common Journey. Recommendation number one of the National Academy was, do not try to solve your problems in one huge step, do it step by step. Go through a transition process, say we will do A, B, and C in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, review, start again. And finally, using this, my recommendation is make the IPICYT SELA the principal agency on the border of the US-Mexico Drylands to develop 10-year, I pick this with the transition idea in mind, sustainability plans, and to do it in 2 different ways. Very important now. One for the basin as a whole, and one for each sub-basin, so that the stakeholders have a role in this big task. Some colleagues of mine and myself use the information we have developed to say, this is how we define sustainability of the Rio Grande, of any river with these characteristics. 4 important points. Number one, define the dependable yield. The dependable yield is what the river delivers during the worst drought so far experienced since construction of the reservoir. Number two, while you work ahead and wait for the next drought, do not do nothing. Water managers and stakeholders work together proactively and improve water allocation and water use. Number three, when either nature or society change the dependable yield, redefine it, and make sure that you have clear enforceable numbers for water allocation to say, this is what we can afford, this is what we cannot afford. And finally, maybe it shouldn't be finally, take absolute as a priority that this dependable yield provides a logically defined, reasonable allocation to nature, environmental flow. Let me just finish by saying what I just said for the Rio Grande is part of a 10-river project around the world, which I have the unfortunate role of being editor-in-chief for a book that needs to come out and isn't ready yet. So I need some hand-holding. These rivers listed on this table, I will not give you more than one important detail. As you see, the Rio Grande is listed here. It has a unique feature, which is not a good one. The yellow dot says, this is how much water reaches the ocean, in this case, the Gulf of Mexico. The Rio Grande is the worst performer on that criterion. And actually, in some years, there has been no discharge. There has been a buildup of a sand dune in the middle of the river. Okay, sir, it's all yours.
Thank you. I think we'll hold comments. Vamos a esperar para que se terminen los dos y luego hacemos la discusión. Thank you so much. Okay. So there's a brief message from our coordinator. Gracias. There's a dinner this evening for all in the conference, and here are the instructions. We need to get to the Labyrinto Museum at 6:30. We'll have a 45-minute visit at the. Okay, we need to leave here at 6. And there'll be a bus transport, right? Yeah. Okay, to the museum. We'll have a 45-minute tour of the museum. The governor of the state of San Luis Potosi will be here this evening at 7:30 to arrive for dinner with us. And they indicate that we can be casually dressed, which is great, since I think we'll be leaving from here and won't have time to put on our evening attire. So that the men don't need to wear a tie. And then we can't take photographs or video or use our cellular cameras to take any pictures while we're with the governor. And I would imagine also at the museum, but yeah. So that's the message. So when we're finished here, we'll move directly to the buses. Okay? Thank you. So here.
The buses will go to the hotel? No, to the museum directly.
Okay.
Bien. Mientras terminen de bajar la presentación, I do speak English, but I would like to speak now in Spanish. I do apologize for those I do understand it is just one or a couple of persons. Jürgen does know about this talk, so I will proceed. It is late now, and we've been here since early today. And in order to privilege the dialogue that we had earlier, I will try to move forward. These are just reflections banking upon what Jürgen just mentioned. And as I said, I'll try to keep it really very brief. Yo trabajo en el Departamento de Economía y en el Centro del Agua para América Latina del Tecnológico de Monterrey. He estado trabajando estos temas del agua en la frontera y el río Bravo en general y la parte baja desde hace varios años. A mediados de los 90s, México y Estados Unidos están en una sequía muy severa y con Jurgen, el Centro de Estudios Avanzados de Houston, hicimos una investigación con financiamiento de la EPA que terminamos en el año 2000. Agua y desarrollo sostenible, le llamamos en la parte baja del río Bravo. Me estoy prestando ya el trabajo que Christopher Scott hizo esta mañana. Me presto también el trabajo que Rosario Sánchez, Rosario fue mi alumna en el TEC de Monterrey en Relaciones Internacionales, una muy buena estudiante, el trabajo que ella y José Luis hicieron para no tener que dar ese marco sobre la frontera que ya está ahí. Quiero privilegiar en este caso en particular un acercamiento como con una lupa para ver cómo al interior de la parte baja del río hay toda una serie de complejidades, ¿sí? Y que vale la pena tenerlas presentes. No lo tomen como comercial. Este es un libro que publicamos en 2015, Agua para Monterrey. El subtítulo refleja parte de la pregunta que le hicieron a José Luis y a Rosario. ¿Cuál es la parte estratégica de la frontera? Monterrey es una ciudad que tiene 4.5 millones de habitantes, es la metrópolis más grande de la cuenca del río Bravo, aporta a la economía nacional poco menos del 8% en general, pero hay ramas de la manufactura, como la metalmecánica, la automotriz, el hierro y el acero, el vidrio, cuya aportación es de 2 dígitos. Es un gran importante contribuidor también a las exportaciones mexicanas, recibe muchos flujos de migración, hablando de flujos, Rosario, José Luis, recibe muchos migrantes, recibe también mucha inversión productiva. Kia Motors se fue a Monterrey, por eso es el comentario de hace rato de los coreanos que están en la ciudad. Es una metrópolis de gran significancia para México. Y en ese sentido, el subtítulo del libro lo dice todo, de que el que Monterrey tenga agua o no es un asunto de interés nacional. A México le interesa que la ciudad tenga agua. Sí. Esta es el área metropolitana en la cuenca del río San Juan. Este es un acercamiento a la parte baja todavía de la cuenca. Aquí tenemos el Golfo, aquí están los Estados Unidos, aquí está Texas, esta es la cuenca del San Juan, este es un estado, Coahuila, este es otro estado, Nuevo León, acá otro estado, Tamaulipas, Zacatecas, y aquí apenas, no es San Luis Potosí, pero un proyecto futuro para el área metropolitana es llevar un acueducto que viene desde por aquí hasta el área metropolitana. Es una cuenca compleja, se ve pequeña en la escala grande de la frontera México-Estados Unidos, pero se los quise mostrar para que vean la serie de complejidades políticas, institucionales y los conflictos, pero también la cooperación que hay en la cuenca. Obviamente el clima, y me gustó que en la sesión de la mañana una de las preguntas, no hace rato, una de las preguntas de los estudiantes jóvenes tiene que ver con el contexto. Y en este libro, cuando lo escribimos en 2015 y que lo estamos por actualizar, unos 5 o 6 meses más lo vamos a publicar, está en el sitio, el portal de internet del Centro del Agua para América Latina. Vamos a terminar con datos de diciembre de 2017. Pero la primera parte del libro tiene que ver con el entorno geográfico climático. Cualquier análisis del abasto de agua en una ciudad tiene que empezar por su clima, y este es un clima complejo. Y es importante también diferenciarlo porque nos podemos olvidar de cambio climático. Y entonces, sí, de veras, y entonces centrarnos en manejar el clima, porque una cosa es la variabilidad climática y otra cosa es cambio climático. ¿Sí? Y esta ciudad se ha adaptado a un clima complejo. Este es el área metropolitana. Y se ve, son microclimas. Aquí está mucho más seco, por acá está la ciudad de Saltillo, por acá está la tierra de Rosario Sánchez. Esto es más húmedo, ¿sí? Entonces, estos son datos de precipitación de todos estos años que están acá. Entonces, es una región semiárida. Llueve poco, a menos que llegue un huracán, y sí llegan, ¿de acuerdo? Sí llegan. Entonces, es una metrópolis semiárida, semidesértica, que se las ha arreglado con una serie de factores para tener agua 24 horas, 7 días a la semana, a presión constante. ¿Qué significa presión constante? Que no hay necesidad de un tinaco, como en el pasado, y que no hay necesidad de una cisterna, como en el pasado. Pero hay una serie de factores que están detrás, ¿sí? Entonces, por eso es importante el escenario del clima. Esta es una foto de su topografía. Esta es la parte alta de las montañas. Esta es el área metropolitana, cómo ha crecido durante estos últimos años. Y así como esta ciudad es semiárida, cuando llega un huracán, al urbanizar esta parte alta, adivinen qué es lo que pasa. Al urbanizar esto, el agua escurre a gran velocidad y llega al río que atraviesa la ciudad en minutos. Entonces, no es un problema de inundación, es un problema de avenida rápida y es un problema del patrón urbano que hemos hecho. No es problema de la lluvia, no es problema del cambio climático, es un problema de la gestión que hemos hecho de ciudad. Esas son las montañas. De hecho, su profesor vive por acá, el profesor Castro vive por acá a la vuelta. ¿Sí? Entonces, se ve toda esta urbanización que está de este lado. De hecho, esta foto tiene como unos 7 años. Tengo fotos más recientes donde se ve que esto ha crecido muchísimo más por acá. Sí, es el Boulevard Acapulco, exacto. Entonces, el mensaje que les comentaba es eso. Al llover en la parte alta, el agua va a escurrir. Y con una urbanización especulativa, donde la ganancia, el interés del dinero ha privado sobre la gestión responsable, es obvio que esto está presentando un problema para la gestión y el manejo de la ciudad. Pero no es un problema del agua per se, es un problema de todo el entorno. Ese es el río Santa Catarina. Esto está en el centro de la ciudad. Ustedes ven los anchos de aquí. Sí, 260 metros, 260, 140. Cuando llega el agua de la parte alta, va a escurrir aquí a gran velocidad. ¿Y qué hace el agua? Reclama su cauce. Perfectamente entendible. Sí, perfectamente entendible. Sí. Cuando llegó el huracán Gilberto en 1988, muchas personas se murieron. Al principio de 1900, llegó un huracán que mató a más de 5,000 personas. En 1930, a la mitad de 1930, colonias enteras quedaron incomunicadas. Esta foto fue tomada después del huracán Alex en 2010. A raíz del huracán Gilberto en 1988, se construyó una presa en la parte alta que se llama la presa Rompepicos, ayudó a aliviar el problema de la inundación. Entonces, cuando hablamos en la mañana en esta discusión, que Christopher Scott nos decía, la abundancia y la escasez y gestionar eso, sí, la ciudad muestra la escasez, muestra la relevancia también de abordar la presencia de esas avenidas rápidas. Sí. En 1999, escribí un artículo en esta revista que se llama Natural Resources Journal. Fíjense los años de los que estamos hablando. Sí, es la sequía de mediados de los 1990. En Cuernavaca hubo una reunión, un pequeño seminario, en el que estuvieron los dos comisionados, John Bernal por Estados Unidos y Arturo Herrera por parte de México, sí, con sus esposas, en ese tipo de ambiente de cordialidad y de cooperación que ha caracterizado a los dos países. Sí. Producto de ese seminario, Natural Resources Journal publicó este número especial. Sí, yo tengo aquí un trabajo sobre el conflicto del cuchillo que está justamente en esta parte baja. La parte baja es interesante porque es el final de un sistema multitributario muy complejo. ¿Sí? De 1 año y medio para acá he estado trabajando con la Universidad de Oxford en un proyecto para el Banco Mundial. Es un estudio piloto. Al Banco Mundial le interesa México, Australia, Sao Paulo, en Brasil y Sudáfrica, en ver las asignaciones de agua del área rural a las ciudades. Quiere ver cómo son esos mecanismos de reasignación del agua del campo a la ciudad. ¿Cómo es que se dieron esas asignaciones? ¿Qué contratos? ¿Sí? ¿Cuáles fueron los arreglos? ¿Quiénes son los ganadores? ¿Quiénes son los perdedores? ¿Sí? ¿Cuál es la parte jurídica, la parte legal? ¿Cuál es lo incierto de esos arreglos? ¿Sí? Los agricultores cambiaron, la ciudad que pagó. Lo estamos terminando, es un estudio muy interesante, pero a mí me dio la oportunidad de regresar a examinar este caso del cuchillo casi 20 años después y darme cuenta que había habido cosas que pasé por alto, pero otras que se fueron cumpliendo al pie de la letra. Y que la historia en este caso es una gran aliada porque pone en perspectiva las cosas. La presa del cuchillo que está como por ahí, se lo voy a mostrar más adelante, una foto más grande, era proyecto ya desde los años 1920. Estamos todavía lejos de 1944 y el tratado. Y desde entonces ya se decía que si México construía una presa ahí tenía que haber un reglamento por la naturaleza semiárida de la región y eso no ocurrió. Es fecha todavía que le tenemos que hacer un trabajo pendiente, asegurarse que las reglas de operación de esa presa satisfacen a los intereses de los dos estados. Sí. Esa es una foto de la compuerta de la presa, y eso es lo que el Banco Mundial está interesado en entender como estudios piloto en esas transferencias del agua rural al área urbana. Es la foto cuando se inauguró la presa, es el presidente Carlos Salinas de Gortari. Aquí está el gobernador de Nuevo León, Sócrates Rizo. A él, entre otras cosas, los conflictos con el estado vecino le costó la gubernatura. ¿Sí? Salinas no era de Nuevo León, pero se creía hijo de Nuevo León y forzó al estado vecino políticamente a que se diera el derecho que tenía sobre esas aguas para construir la presa. Esto es lo que les quería mostrar. Y hablando en la mañana de flujos, a mí me gustó mucho, y me gustó mucho, Christopher, que pusieron este taller en esas categorías, ¿sí? De flujos y recursos, ¿sí? Y me gustó la presentación suya, Rosario y José Luis, de flujos y recursos. Lo que ven aquí, este es el área metropolitana de Monterrey. Sí, esa es una pequeña presa que se llama La Boca, está chiquita, tiene 40 millones de metros cúbicos. Aquí es una presa que se llama Cerro Prieto, esta se construyó en 1984, esta tiene 400 millones de metros cúbicos. Este es el Cuchillo, este es de 1994, esta tiene 1.200 millones de metros cúbicos. Antes de que se construyera esta presa, el agua fluye para acá. Esta es la presa Marta Regómez, en un estado vecino, y aquí están los Estados Unidos. Un cóctel fabuloso para entender las complejidades, ¿sí? De cómo se gestiona el agua en la frontera, en particular en la parte baja. Bueno, primero entender esos flujos toma tiempo. Yo se los digo con toda humildad, yo no creo que en Conagua, y yo no creo ni siquiera que en Sila, y yo no creo que pocas personas pueden entender exactamente cuál es toda la complejidad que está en ese pequeño diagrama. Les voy a decir por qué. El área metropolitana, más de la mitad de su agua en general es del agua subterránea, pero son sistemas, o sea, aquí se puede ver como algo más integrado, más homogéneo, pero hay sistemas del agua subterránea. Esta presa que está aquí es un sistema, este es un sistema, este es otro sistema y este es otro sistema. De hecho, esta presa que está acá ya está en otra cuenca, está en la cuenca de San Fernando. Entonces, de facto, desde 1984, la ciudad tiene una transferencia intercuenca de agua. Y eso se los comento porque el plan futuro de llevar agua a Monterrey viene de por acá, de casi otros 380 kilómetros de agua, en un proyecto muy polémico que se llama Monterrey 6. Entonces, el proyecto pretende llevar agua aquí y de aquí llevársela al área metropolitana. Pero a cambio de esta agua que antes se escurría acá libremente y que ahora se va al área metropolitana, Monterrey le devuelve agua tratada a esta presa que está acá para un distrito de riego que está aquí, que se llama el 026. Pero esta agua tratada, visto como sistema, requirió que la ciudad financiara primero la construcción de las plantas de tratamiento. Entonces, construir las plantas de tratamiento fue un esquema institucional fabuloso porque permitió entonces el intercambio de una agua por otra. Solo que construir esas plantas pues, requiere de dinero, se tiene que financiar. Y la pregunta es, ¿de dónde viene ese financiamiento? Sí, y ese financiamiento fue internacional, fue créditos japoneses, fue del gobierno federal. Cuando hay conflictos con el estado vecino por esta presa, empieza la desinformación. Sí, entonces el estado vecino dice, bueno, nosotros éramos dueños de esta agua, sí, ¿por qué la tenemos ahora que compartir? Y Nuevo León también dice, ¿por qué la tenemos que compartir si nosotros pagamos por ella? Pero Nuevo León y Monterrey pagó por esta agua, el gobierno federal pagó por esta agua, y el gobierno federal administra esta presa y esta y esta. No es de Nuevo León, no es de Monterrey. Entonces, en tiempos de sequía, ese es un asunto delicado para la ciudad, porque aún en tiempos de sequía, el acuerdo que permite la administración de esta presa implica que hay que llevarle agua acá, o una compensación financiera. Y esa compensación financiera está en función del agua tratada que llega de aquí a acá. Pero adivinen qué, a lo largo de este cauce hay tomas irregulares de agua en los dos estados. Entonces hay una cuestión jurídica de vigilar las corrientes que están circulando por ese flujo. ¿Sí ven? Entonces, este es un esquema complicado, requiere como de 10 subsistemas, por lo menos para entenderlo. ¿Sí? Y luego, modelarlo, métele números, lo que dice usted, métele los números y hacer los modelos, y entonces tener reglas de operación para esta presa en condiciones de sequía y en condiciones de abundancia. Cuando llega el huracán, el agua escurre para acá. Para Tamaulipas, en perspectiva, tiene Nuevo León una presa por la que no pagó un centavo y le sirve como un vaso regulatorio. Después de 20 años, todo el mundo está de acuerdo que el Cuchillo fue un gran proyecto. Pero 20 años atrás, los medios de comunicación están golpeando al gobernador y es algo que aquí casi no hemos discutido, cuál es el papel de los medios. Los medios tienen también su agenda y también tienen sus intereses y a menudo terminan desinformando. Sí, y espero que nadie se sienta aquí Pero los medios de comunicación a menudo, casados con grupos ambientalistas muy extremos, lejos de ayudar, están perjudicando porque están desinformando a la ciudadanía. Sí, les voy a dar un solo ejemplo. En la disputa por Monterrey 6, varios grupos ambientalistas decían, ¿por qué tenemos que traer agua de acá si perdemos 30% del agua que está llegando? Pero la ciudad no pierde 30%, eso se llama agua no contabilizada, non-accounted water for, ese es el concepto. Y sí, implica pérdidas físicas, pero también hay un consumo popular de colonias que no tienen dinero para pagar el agua y que la están usando, es decir, alguien la está consumiendo, lo que representa es una pérdida financiera porque no entra a la tesorería del organismo operador. Entonces nos vamos a los conceptos y nos vamos a las definiciones que hablaron en la mañana. Sí, entonces es importante entender los conceptos porque pueden llevar implicaciones de política terribles. Sí. En Monterrey es eso, es semiárido, pero llueve mucho. Perdón, llegan los huracanes. Entonces los huracanes son bienvenidos, destrozan parte de la infraestructura, sí, pero nos han traído agua. De hecho, pareciera que la mejor política ha sido el huracán. Ese es un acercamiento a las 3 presas que le llevan agua a Monterrey. Y si ustedes se fijan, ese es el promedio, ¿sí? Entonces, veníamos aquí con estos niveles, sí, veníamos aquí, en septiembre 13 llegó el huracán Ingrid. Si este huracán no hubiera llegado aquí, estaríamos por acá, ya se estaban orquestando medidas para restringir el agua, sí, pero afortunadamente llegó el Ingrid y vino a rescatar otra vez a la ciudad, sí. Claro, le podemos apostar a no construir ninguna más infraestructura, le podemos apostar a no construir ninguna otra presa en ninguna otra parte, solo que hay un riesgo. Y si estamos dispuestos a tomar el riesgo, adelante, ¿de acuerdo? Entonces nos lleva a una cuestión del riesgo. Estoy ya casi terminando. Esta ciudad de Monterrey es un caso muy particular. A raíz de la inseguridad que azotó Monterrey allá por el 2010, mi familia y yo estábamos pensando en cambiarnos de ciudad. ¿A dónde? Bueno, una ciudad que tenga 24 horas, agua, no, pues tachamos casi todas. Una ciudad que tenga buenos servicios médicos de alto nivel, pues tachamos otras. Sí. Entonces, el hecho de que esta ciudad tenga los servicios de agua que tiene no es un asunto fortuito. Les puse fórmula aquí en colores porque en realidad no hay ninguna fórmula. Lo que encontramos es que en este círculo hay determinantes internos que estos gobiernan a los otros que están acá afuera. Sí, tiene que haber visión y planeación de entrada. Y desde 1900 esta ciudad entendió que tenía que hacer algo con su servicio de agua y empezó la modernización desde entonces. Desde hace años y años que un usuario en Monterrey paga su servicio de agua en cualquier centro, ¿sí? De innovar a tratar el agua que está usando para poderla intercambiar. Entonces, lo que está gobernando este diagrama es la innovación que está aquí alrededor. Requiere visión, pero también entender ese contexto de clima y es un asunto de política. Cuando decimos que el agua se politizó, eso es perfectamente entendible. Desde que el agua escurre de arriba hacia abajo y que pasa diferentes fronteras, por definición, está entrando en la arena política. Y finalmente hay un asunto aquí que tiene que ver con la suerte, tiene que ver con lo fortuito, tiene que ver con cosas que no podemos controlar, ¿sí? Que no las podemos prever. Bien, estoy ya terminando. El futuro, el cambio climático. ¿Qué es lo que se espera para esta parte baja de la cuenca? No va a ser más húmedo, va a ser más seco. 2, no va a ser más estable, probablemente sea más extremo en todo caso, y esto es lo que les comentaba. Con y sin cambio climático, la necesidad de adaptarse es clara y es urgente. En todo caso, los escenarios de cambio climático van a complicar la película. ¿Sí? ¿A dónde nos lleva? A la gestión del riesgo y la vulnerabilidad. De que entonces nos tenemos que mover a analizar los riesgos, ¿sí? Si consultan el reporte de riesgos globales 2018 del Foro Económico Mundial, de los riesgos más importantes para los negocios en el mundo, tienen que ver con agua, con la adaptación al cambio climático, con fenómenos extremos, con las crisis del agua que le afectan a los negocios. ¿Sí? El reporte 2014 que me permití mostrarles aquí del informe de desarrollo del Banco Mundial se lo dedica al riesgo y le llama riesgos para el desarrollo, con el mensaje que vale la pena tomar riesgos informados. Es lo que les comentaba hace rato. No tenemos que desembolsar ningún peso si no queremos construir ninguna infraestructura para la ciudad y apostarle a que llegue un huracán. ¿Qué tal si no llega? ¿Qué tal si no llega? Y entonces ahí, como consumidores, y yo soy consumidor, yo puedo sacar la cartera. Y si la ciudad me dice que va a crear un fondo de prevención, yo le apuesto a ese fondo, porque no quiero correr ese riesgo. Perdón, los otros reportes que le mostré aquí, creo que me fui a... ¿Me lo puede pasar? Ya prácticamente terminamos. Hay otros reportes que les quería comentar internacionales que están poniendo el acento sobre el riesgo. Y eso es lo que hay que ver. Sí. Y simular y modelar estos temas del riesgo. Perdón, estamos aquí atrás. Sí. Este reporte 2013 de Naciones Unidas, UNESCO 2012, le han estado poniendo la atención a estas cuestiones climáticas, el riesgo, la vulnerabilidad, y que entonces el análisis de la gestión del agua tiene que ver con eso. ¿Sí? Finalmente, con esto termino. Esta frase que vienen aquí es un libro de 2001 sobre finanzas municipales, intergubernamentales, y esa es la conclusión que viene en la página 122, y habla por sí misma en el sentido de que se le tiene que poner atención a la previsión, a la imaginación, a esforzarse, a la prudencia, ¿sí? Y que estos puntos que vienen aquí son las características que tiene cualquier buen gobierno en cualquier parte del mundo, ¿sí? Este es un libro sobre finanzas metropolitanas, sobre gestión de la ciudad, ¿sí? Y al final, en sus conclusiones, habla de estos asuntos. Se tiene que prever, hay que imaginar cosas, ¿sí? Hay que esforzarse y sobre todo hay que ser prudentes, hay que ser prudentes. Sí. Yo tengo una licenciatura en ingeniería civil, pero tengo posgrados en economía. Y algo que aprendí en economía de diccionario y que me lo he llevado a mi vida personal y que me ha funcionado muy bien, es que la economía al final del día tiene que ver con la administración recta y prudente de los bienes. La administración recta y prudente de los bienes. Entonces, ese es el mensaje. Seamos rectos y seamos prudentes en la gestión del agua y de esta frontera, ¿sí?, que nos ha convocado esta mañana aquí. Entonces, yo termino, por favor, para que demos pie a la discusión.
Muchas gracias. Esos dos ponentes, both of those talks were really helpful in kind of characterizing the many governance challenges, and I'm sure many of you who are here can also bring up some of your own water-related or related to other issues such as land tenure or water rights or cultural heritage. There's a number of issues that have governance dimensions to them. I think what was interesting that we heard is the need for flexibility and kind of adaptability and what we might call anticipatory governance, looking ahead, trying to imagine what's coming down the road. And given the kind of complex political boundaries that have to be managed in this area and the high variability. So I think maybe thinking about the innovations that are trying to address some of the issues that we've heard this morning of like the highly variable areas, lots of flows, lots of movement, quite different types of populations and needs that are in the region. So I'd like to just open up the floor and let's get some good conversation going and speak in any language you feel. Well, let's stick it to Spanish and English, but either one. I don't think I can help with anything else. So.
I have a question for Ismael. Well, first I need some clarification because you mentioned an international project about movement of water from rural areas to urban areas that happened a while back. Did you say that there was a collaboration with Oxford and some, right? So has any of that been applied, I guess, to this area would be my first question. And then me not knowing much about the areas where those, where those dams are, where the basin is, if it's urban, if it's rural, can any of that kind of be applied to this context? And does it get harder as the urban areas get bigger to carry out those kind of, those kind of movement issues? And is that also a problem, like with the expansion of the urban areas?
Gracias. Muy interesante tu presentación, Ismael. Yo tengo, como has trabajado mucho toda esta área, yo tengo una pregunta que te quisiera hacer. Quisiera nos dieras tu visión, digamos, dentro de todo lo que estudiaste, todo este sistema complejo que estudiaste que incluye a la ciudad de Monterrey, la área metropolitana, al órgano operador que la maneja, a Agua y Drenaje de Monterrey, que por cierto creo que maneja el agua también en el estado. Digamos, todo eso, las relaciones que tiene el órgano operador tal vez con el organismo de cuenca respectivo y el consejo de cuenca, todo eso, tomando todo eso, ¿cuál es tu percepción de gobernanza de esta región?
¿Quieres contestar, Ismael?
This study I was talking about, and I'm sorry about the little time I dedicated to it. It is a pilot study promoted by the World Bank, interested in these cases I was referring to, in order to learn about these transfers, what works, what doesn't work about these transfers, what is the role of the initial negotiations, and something I didn't say, and it was very important on the template for these studies, is to actually have face-to-face discussions with key stakeholders and actors. For instance, we had the chance to talk to 4 state governors and to actually ask them about the role they had 20 years ago or 15 years ago, and bring that knowledge forward in a reflective way. We also had a chance to talk to the farmers, of course, as stakeholders, and to actually try to see in the most objective way, which is difficult to start with anyway, if there are winners and losers, and especially the compensation schemes. The bank is very interested in learning about the compensation scheme. People downstream feel the compensation is not working, but this takes us to the question of data. And getting data on compensation and the financial resources to the farmers is difficult. At the beginning, the federal government did put the funds. Later on, the state government put the funds to the farmers. But you see, at one time, the farmers said, we don't want to be compensated for by the federal government. We want to be compensated for by those that are taking our water. So it becomes a more sensitive issue. So, but at the end of the day, the bank did select these case studies where actually at the very end of assembling the full report is going to be available soon. Something we did learn is that all these discussions are context-driven. In other words, although there are some general guidelines, the context does matter a lot. I have a colleague, Dustin Garrick. He's going to come to Monterrey in 2 weeks' time. We're organizing an international forum, and he's going to have a preview of this full report, and we are very happy with it. Secondly, Jose Luis, I feel your question is a very important one. We, as in the rest of Mexico, we have this figure called the Consejo de Cuenca, the Basin Council. In my view, the Basin Council was designed in order not to function well. It is not possible that we could have a single representative by an agricultural sector that is really large, and that only someone could have actually the view of the entire sector. It didn't have the finance to do that. Many of these people that are working in the council are doing it in good faith. There were no financial provisions for the council to function. And even in an area like this one, that is highly advanced and highly modernized, there are a lot of conflicts still between the actors, you know. So I feel there is a lot of work to do as far as governance goes within the basin. We have spent a lot of time in building a model to actually model all the interrelationships that are within the basin. But the bottom line has to do with politics. The large advances have occurred when there are crises. But sometimes I feel that we have, sometimes there are crises there and still we do not react to that. You know, as far as the local water authority, that's a different case study. The local water authority we do have is a rich one because it is in a rich region that could pay for water. You know, it has the figure of some sort of enterprise board. So there is not like other places in Mexico, that only one person is attached to the political party or a political figure. We have a more representative institutional body that has the views from other actors as well. It works more like an enterprise. Still, the governor appoints the director general, but there is more input from the private sector. So the private sector has a lot to say in these matters. And this is what I was trying to point out earlier on. There is no formula like that. The Monterrey experience cannot be transplanted elsewhere without taking into account these contextual differences.
Thank you. I think that illustrates the need for not only innovation and organization, but the kind of the politics and the financing and all of those extra pieces to make these innovations work. Did you have a Rosario? No?
Yes. I was thinking, and then I start speaking. So, okay. So the case of Monterrey, it's a very unique case. It's a study case, actually. And I don't think we can see a replication of that case in the rest of the country. So I imagine it's not this only city with those kind of challenges. What makes it different? I mean, what had to happen? Who were the players? What level of agreement? What was the creativity element or imagination, or what had to happen in order for this to reach this level of creativity, given the limitations of the actual legal framework in Mexico? So I want to know why it's that unique, because it is unique.
That's a good question, Rosario, and I'm sorry I did not have enough time to actually go in more detail. But just let me illustrate this with something. When I was saying that there are a lot of aspects that have to do with fate and good fortune, I will give you an example. When Fernando Canales was the first state governor coming from the opposition in Nuevo León. He's the state governor. And then Vicente Fox is president. And Fox asked him to be his secretary for the economy. Fernando Canales replaced the director general of the local water authority. You know, the next governor, you know, said, this guy that is no longer here has a lot of experience. He didn't bring it back. This person has little knowledge about water, but has a lot about business practices. And he did modernize a lot of what we now see in the local water authority. So the point here is, if Fox had not been president and Fernando Canales had not been asked to go there, perhaps some of the changes that we did see later on could never have taken place. So a lot of these discussions have to do with these kind of issues. You know, and of course, the city itself has a tradition for innovation. And a key action that we did identify is the role of the state governors. We did have a state governor whose name is Alfonso Martinez Dominguez. He was very powerful. When President Miguel de la Madrid says that the federal government is not going to support the construction of Cerro Prieto Dam, he said, well, I'm not responsible for the conflicts in the streets if you don't give us the money. So at the end of the day, the federal government had to give in and finance the construction of the dam. So these kind of issues cannot be put into a formula, are very, very case specific. But of course, there are lessons. Surely there are lessons. Healthy finances have a lot to do with that. So we have water 24 hours a day because the organism has the financial resources to do that. You know, most of the local water authorities are broken. You know, because they work in an institutional setting that is very limited, and with few resources, I just couldn't see how could they provide good services to people.
Thanks very much. I have an observation, which maybe it is a question, but I'll make an observation and then see if I can frame a question around it. So I think in terms of governance of, binational questions and sort of innovation, which is the topic of our Knowledge Cafe today, but even drawing on some of the flows, section that we had, or the Knowledge Cafe we had this morning. Sometimes these governance challenges are as much a question of local or interstate, governance challenges and policy questions and so forth. In this case, Nuevo León and Tamaulipas, and the federal government as well. The fact that it's near the border with the US is almost an afterthought. I mean, this could have well played out in many other locations. The fact also that Mexico and the US with the IBWC SILA and the operation of the Martere Gomez Dam, I think at one level was a backdrop to the way this Monterrey El Cuchillo case, played out, played a role, but that the primary politics of decision-making around water and investments and allocation and, negotiations was interstate. Now, so the question then is there a way in which we look at these binational governance and innovation questions, and also binational cooperation of the kind we're talking of forming out of this committee process and this workshop process that goes along with a local and in state and an interstate, in other words, a domestic within country question? We're never going to solve all the questions locally and then look at state and then look at national or binational, or the reverse. What's the right mix of going forward with different collaboration agendas? Partly where the question is coming from is within the US, in the Southwest area around water. Arizona always sees itself in opposition to water in California. So California is, in our case, the big, political beast that has to be sort of somehow managed, or, water allocation questions. And in some ways, we find it easier to collaborate on water questions and governance and management and policy with Mexico than we do with our own neighboring state of California. So this is the question: how do we go about these things at the same time in sequence? So it's a reflection.
It seems to me that one issue might be thinking about maybe not, there is no one rationale for doing it, but the collection of cases and experiences and making those available may support the kind of creating those windows of opportunity, so that if someone finds themselves in a position, they have different models and examples to work. And maybe that's part of what we could be thinking about doing, is those collection of novelty and trying to tease out those unique circumstances that gave rise to those opportunities.
I have I have my doubts about how to answer your question, because see, CONAGUA, is its national policy. It's conducted through these organismos de cuenca, right? 13 organismos de cuenca. So they, the law of national waters specifically specifies that, the cuenca, the watershed, as the unit of planning for everything, and also the integrated planning of the resources as a major paradigm. Okay, but that's one thing. The law is one thing. The other thing is how to operationalize the laws. Okay, so the consejos de cuenca, I mean, mostly the organismos de cuenca, they haven't got exactly to operate the law. So and the law still continues to be centralized. Okay, CONAGUA is always in the consejos de cuenca sessions. They provide the norms. They provide the financial programs. In one way, they handle, the way the consejos de cuenca are. So in that way, it's difficult, because when we talk about transboundary watersheds, it's SILA, the only one, and by presidential appointment, in charge of those things. So the law of national waters has nothing to do with binational or international watersheds. So in that sense, it's difficult to think of, governance, okay? I tend to think more in governance when you think of the IBWC, the counterparts. There's more governance in that sense, and I think that's one of the things that we have to work with the United States. We talked about this before because the local levels, the border, they have actors that interact daily on a daily basis. They exchange information. They go to different meetings. They have these abilities, local capacities to exchange information and to provide. The Minute 320 is the example of what all of these people working together in the Tijuana International Watershed, I forgot it, but I'll say it in Spanish. Que consiguieron, it was un premio, okay, to their patience, to their work, and finally IBWC and SILA recognize these efforts through the Minute 320, and I think it's a matter of time, that we have to work on in those spaces. Thank you.
It's something that I find very interesting in both of your presentations and thinking about this comment that if we consider this region very dynamic, highly variable, with real significant unevenness of resource access and distribution, all these challenges that we know face. Perhaps it's that very context that allows for those opportunities where people say they have to solve the problem. So maybe at the national level, there's certain only legal mandates and actors who can act, but then if it's not addressing the full complexity of what you have to manage, you come to an agreement, you figure out a way. And I wonder whether, as a kind of a way to think about governance in this region, is to say, well, is it something about this region that, and I don't know what the control case would be, that would allow for this kind of innovation to occur. And I think we could probably think of examples that are not just in water, but in biodiversity or in cultural resources as well.
The IBWC SILA, going back to 1944, old compared to NAFTA and the Border Environment Cooperation Commission, the three-party agreements with Canada. Even though NAFTA, those agreements are now under political attack, they are higher on the totem pole than IBWC SILA. A second relative weakness of IBWC SILA may be the requirement explicitly stated in the treaty that the commissioners must be professional engineers. So this isn't open to somebody with a political standing in each of those countries. On the other hand, it gives them some degree of objectivity and independence, which the NAFTA, etc. institutions have not enjoyed. Frankly, my preference would be, and it will not happen in the immediate future, to think about upgrading IBWC SILA rather than superseding them by a redesigned NAFTA or something of that nature.
Yo quiero hacer un comentario respecto a lo que sucede en Monterrey y cómo baja el agua, el cauce y todo eso. Yo creo que lo mismo ocurre en varias ciudades de México. Aquí en San Luis Potosí ocurre lo mismo en el río Santiago, que de hecho se llama así, no es el cauce del mismo río. Y aquí no hay huracanes, pero cuando llueve, pues se podría ocupar ese tipo de agua y hacer ese tipo de transferencia a lo mejor de Monterrey aquí a San Luis Potosí. Lo mismo ocurre en la ciudad de Querétaro. Entonces, yo creo que son como faltas de comunicación entre gobiernos, entre nosotros mismos. Yo creo que la transferencia de ese tipo de tecnología que se tiene es muy importante para todas las ciudades, no únicamente aquí en México, sino pues a nivel mundial también.
Okay, I have two questions, one for each of you, but I'll say them both now. So in Monterey, I'm curious, how closely are you working with the atmospheric scientists in the hurricane community to better understand the forecasting, downscaling, and such? And then the question for you, Jürgen, is, and I'm not familiar with the topic area that you spoke about, but when you mentioned the process wherein the minutes approach and the process wherein if there's an issue, somebody from the US can talk to somebody from Mexico and they can outline a local solution and put together a proposal to the governments. And if within a certain period of time they don't get a response, it automatically goes into effect. Was that correct? And then I'll just add, if that is correct, it's quite interesting because it sounds like behavioral economics approaches at the governance level. So we try to nudge people at the individual level behavior-wise, but it sounds like organizational level.
My understanding of the minute process when it goes to final approval or disapproval, number one, the minutes cannot fundamentally change what is written in the binational agreement. It has to be a slight addendum, a gap be overlooked, and it remains the prerogative of the State Department or Foreign Affairs in Mexico to say, you went too far, therefore we disagree, or to say, this looks good to us, and therefore it is approved within this 30-day period. What this 30-day period also indicates, in our binational agreements in this country, major binational agreements need to be approved by the Senate, the US Senate. The minute system is below the attention of the US Senate, which again says, on the one hand, it makes it easier. On the other hand, it cannot cover some very fundamental problems.
This question is a fascinating one. Thank you for putting forward it. And of course, yes, we have been working over the last few years with Victor Magaña. Victor was going to be here, actually. He couldn't make it. Victor has helped us in building the climate scenarios. And with those scenarios, we then use the hydrology scenarios. And then I have a colleague that does the economic scenarios, and then the institutional economic side, and at the very end, the political economy perspective on water services. We have been published together. We did publish an article on the Journal of Physics and Chemistry of the Earth. It has open access, and we did exactly as such. And we did found that Monterrey is in a serious danger of having the 0-day scenario. The bad news is that in spite of the progress of the city, we still do not have the protocols for day 0. And we better begin to do that. You know, we have another article together, all this team, that was published in Water Policy. There was a special issue commissioned by the UN, High Panel on Water and Disasters, and we did analyze Mexico's response over the last 25 years to droughts. We didn't find any surprising finding that we do have a reactive approach. Nonetheless, we had a chance to prove it, and that this is not good news for us. And we're also working now on a new paper for building resilience in the Monterrey metropolitan area with the same team, using all these interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary. Sometimes it becomes indisciplinary because everyone wants to do what or his or hers wants to do. You know, we didn't mention that here. Sometimes this work is indisciplinary work. So I'm trying to make sure that this work is done well. But yes, the response to your question is yes, we do have contacts with the climate community and atmospheric science community. Yep.
One thing that I wish Scott were here, Chris was here, Chris Scott, I always say that. Thinking about the systems that are well adapted. So if we think of Monterrey as having achieved a lot of success in terms of stability of water supply to date, and we think of the same in Arizona often, Phoenix water supply is fairly stable. We have an abundance of supply, but we're in an area which is characterized by lots of scarcity and potentially pending crises in terms of the Colorado River flows, et cetera. So how does the kind of achievement being adapted at one moment in time impede the ability or the willingness to kind of anticipate and invest in those zero, the plan for that 0 day? And I think there may be something there as well in terms of, as long as your governance is flexible enough, maybe you can accommodate as the crisis emerges. But if it becomes too complacent, then it can be difficult to mobilize efforts to really organize for that crisis possibility. And that's where I think climate change does have a implication, because the degree of variability can shift, and suddenly we're not careful. So, other comments? Ana? Sadio? Any examples that are not about water that we are knowledgeable of, or we think we should put on the table about governance? I mean, I can think, it's not my area, but I mean, we've talked about, migration governance and issues of, there's also these trade flows and all sorts of other things that are really critical for the environment and sustainability of the region. I know in terms of agriculture, what is considered to be, when there's trade embargoes and the politics behind that and how that affects the ability of artisanal fishers in Baja California or aguacate production in California. So there's lots of issues there that I think are either ungoverned or governed, that in ways that can generate surprises to each side of the border and to the region. But I don't know if anyone has particular examples.
If I bank upon the presentation of Rosario and Jose Luis, I feel somehow they did the job in showing this governance for a wide array of issues along the US-Mexico border. In other words, we have a non-water agenda, a non-water governance that has to be taken into account. And at the end of the day, I just could see that most of the problems in the water sector are outside the sector.
I guess the big question that I have, or that I want to answer eventually, if ever, it's at what level of management or governance or scale are these kind of efforts more successful and effective? And what is the level of success? So if we think about data exchange, communication, collaboration as a success, I think we have been honestly successful at some point. But then when we talk about effectiveness to reach agreements on important challenges, water challenges, energy challenges, social challenges, I don't think we have been that effective, because the magnitude of the challenge is huge compared to the effectiveness of the actual agreements that we have. IPWCC land, the 1944 treaty, has done their job. I think they've done, the efforts have been pretty decent, but we still don't know anything of groundwater. We still have a lot of things to do on groundwater, and there have been local efforts. The Monterey case is a local effort. The Nogales, Rio Alisos, what Arizona and Sonora are doing, they're regional, local efforts. El Paso, and on the around the 2000, under Ed Archuleta's leadership of the El Paso Water Utilities, was an individual kind of an effort that led to a memorandum of understanding. But it's not a systematic, even in the Monterey case, it looks like a leadership effort that probably wouldn't be able to happen without that leadership. So there's no like structure, institutional, big effort. It has been a result of small steps, individualized in some persons and some particular efforts. So the question is, okay, what exactly do we need? I mean, are we looking for something big, binational, how feasible that is, how practical that is, how successful that could be in the short or long term? Or should we try to focus on those local, more regional scale kind of efforts that tend to be more successful, at least in the short term, but we haven't been able to measure, or we don't have any evidence that those local efforts will actually lead to a change in the system that we're trying to improve? So that's a big question.
I don't know if anyone else has some ideas about this. I mean, I think just off the cuff of my, just thinking about what might be some interesting ways to approach this is thinking about if we had a capacity to bring together some of these cases that have been proven successful or interesting or innovative, and trying to dig under and say, well, what is it? Is it at the social capital? Is it something very idiosyncratic? Is there something that's more about the infrastructure of the case? Something about the data flows or the knowledge or the existing networks that were, what is scalable and what is very unique, rather than the solution itself. It's more about like, can we replicate the context or the solution? I think of infrastructure in a sense, like the social infrastructure, the legal infrastructure that permitted that opportunity to emerge. And maybe that's something that we need to focus more on. And then I also think, just because I study food often and food systems, we don't often think about the governance. We think about the actual production, or we think about, who's food insecure, but the governance is often not the subject of analysis. And because it's less so in water, I think, but we don't have the evidence, we don't have the data, we're not collecting the stories to really get a kind of collection of what are the common themes. Is it personalities? Is it political alliances? Is it, what is it that explains the particular conditions that gave rise to the solutions we've seen that are successful? So maybe that's a task for future research. Anyway, comments? Everybody seems a little tired. I think we're getting to the end. We only have, well, it's about 15 minutes before we have to get on the bus. So do we have any concluding remarks or comments? Yeah.
What I've heard a lot today is about the dynamic system and the dynamic issues. And I'm wondering what dynamic governance would look like, governance that changes and adapts and iterates, and maybe it builds on the report from 20 years ago, which said take things step by step. But are there ways now to do things in a more dynamic way?
And I think that's a real key challenge for sustainability in general. And it has to do not only with the governance, but then we have to think about what is being governed. Not only is also very dynamic, but infrastructure. We're used to these large gray infrastructure projects. Maybe those aren't as flexible as they could be, given the kinds of variability that we need. So the kind of flexibility, adaptability may be part of the kind of theme for this region overall, and as in general for sustainability management. Any other thoughts? Anna and then Jorgen.
Maybe this is because I'm just tired, but I was thinking one of these transboundary water management governance issue is this complication that water has, like things that happen on one side of the border cascade into like Monterrey or all throughout the Rio Bravo. So how do we manage that, like to understand the governance of the water if the problems are like very far away, and maybe because of the political aspects of the boundaries, how do we manage that to negotiate like governance and laws and policies that are transboundary for water management? That's something that just came up right now. Like, okay, so how do we negotiate that? Because there's Conagua and all the political issues on this side of the border, but what about the other political issues on the other side? And it's the same, the natural characteristic of the water, that it flows and travels long distances. So, but the impacts happening like very far away from the original place of the.
Couple of comments. First, we have managed, in managing this joint resource, the river, not the groundwater, to avoid the worst. As far as I know, in recent history, there has never been fired a shot. This is not the case in all river basins. I remember vividly my colleague from Turkey describing hot water conflicts, Euphrates, Tigris. Second, I would put on the agenda of discussion for tomorrow a closer look at some of the international experiences outside of the region. I mentioned how impressed I have been, without having really too much recent knowledge, of how the Australian system decided to use public funds for helping in an intelligent way by appealing to the self-interest of farmers to keep environmental flow at a respectable level. And third, I think we should devote some discussion tomorrow. There have been these experiments to get together water stakeholders at the sub-basin level. None of them, as far as I know, have been permanent successes. There have been temporary successes. What does it require to shift from here's a good leader, he or she disappears, here are some funds, they disappear and run out. What kind of structure do we need to make this more stable, more future potential for going on step by step by step? I think we haven't found the answer to that.
Any last words?
Just wait for the last words.
No,
So-
I don't have any more last words. I think it
So
was a productive.
Jürgen, you were the last words though.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're gonna go in a bus to a very nice science museum called Laberinto. This is the architecture is really nice, and they have a garden of cacti. Cacti, is that the way you say? And it's very beautiful. And the governor is gonna have dinner with us there, and we're gonna have a tour. So we're gonna take a bus. We're gonna be there. We're gonna have a tour of the museum, and the governor will come up at some point. And well, here I don't need. Well, I'm going to say it anywhere. Anyway, the governor is not going to use a tie, so he asked specifically not to wear ties. And simply because we're having elections very soon, so the politicians are banned to show themselves in public places. So no photos with the governor, please. That's the only thing he asked us to do. So that's it. Okay.
Thank you all for your participation, and we will see you in a few minutes on the bus. So thank you.
Entonces,